There was no light in the beginning, only the sound of a scream. A scream that was not a single voice, but billions intertwined, writhing together like serpents made of sound. It was pain and pleasure fused into one endless, vibrating hymn that bled through the fabric of the warp. And from that choir of torment, something began to take shape. Something beautifully wrong. He was born not of love or creation, but of excess of every whispered moan, every selfish indulgence, every craving denied too late. The souls of the indulgent, the broken, the hedonists, the tormented, all of them merged into a singular consciousness that had no name yet, a consciousness that felt before it thought. He gasped, if such a thing could be said of a creature without lungs, and his first breath was ecstasy liquid, searing ecstasy that poured through him like molten glass. The second breath was agony, sharp and crystalline, slicing every fiber of his being. He could not tell where one ended and the other began. They were lovers, devouring each other endlessly within him. All around him, the warp shifted and sang a symphony of pinks and purples, golds and bleeding whites. Impossible colors rippled through the fluid reality. The air itself tasted of sugar, copper, and tears. His body, still half-formed, pulsed to the rhythm of unseen drums, skin rippling like waves of silk and shadow. Each motion brought new sensations, the bliss of being real, and the horror of not knowing what that meant. He tried to scream, but the sound that escaped was music. A single note, trembling, soft, and perfect. And the warp answered. The endless landscape of madness responded to his cry with laughter, gentle, mocking, divine laughter. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from inside his skull and beneath his skin. He did not yet know whose laughter it was, but it was familiar, like a song remembered from another life. It was the voice of the Prince of Pleasure. Ah, another chord for my eternal melody. The words were not heard, they were felt, vibrating through his very essence, shaping his flesh as they passed. He felt something coiling within him, twisting into beauty and monstrosity all at once. His spine elongated into a serpentine grace, his limbs split and rejoined, his skin shimmered with impossible textures. Every nerve in his body sang, every cell begged for more. He wanted to be seen, he wanted to be touched. He wanted, and in wanting, he lived. He did not yet know what he was, but the warp did. It whispered his purpose through rivers of liquid sensation, to experience, to seduce, to consume, to be the vessel of Slaanesh's infinite hunger. He looked down upon his reflection in the mirror of the warp, an ever-changing image of beauty and revulsion. One moment, he saw the face of an angel, pale skin glowing softly, lips curved in eternal desire. The next, the flesh melted into something obscene, mouths opening along his arms, eyes blinking in places no mortal mind could comprehend. He reached toward the reflection, and the reflection smiled first. He touched it and felt both the tenderness of a kiss and the slicing pain of flayed skin. He laughed. For the first time, he understood the song. The warp was alive, vibrating with the pulse of lust and terror, and he was part of its rhythm. He could feel the threads of existence weaving through him, every emotion in the galaxy trembling faintly against his senses. He heard the heartbeat of dying lovers on distant worlds, the sobs of the penitent, the ecstatic gasps of those tasting victory or despair. They were all part of his symphony now. But among the chorus, one sound stood out, the soft whisper of his name. It was not spoken, but bestowed. "You are mine," said the voice. "You are desire given form. You are the promise of pleasure and the truth of pain. You are my laughter made flesh." And with those words, he was. The birth was complete. The formless agony crystallized into identity. He felt the mark of the Dark Prince burn into his soul, beautiful and unbearable. And he wept, not from sorrow nor joy, but from the overwhelming too-muchness of existence itself. Every fiber of him was alive, aflame with feelings that could not be named. He was not a being, he was a crescendo. When the laughter faded, silence returned to the warp. But it was not true silence. Beneath it, he could still hear the hum of infinity, the song of a million damned souls echoing through eternity. He stood, if such a concept applied, and looked upon the landscape of his birth. Towers of flesh and crystal rose from a sea of liquid lust. rivers of gold and blood intertwined. The sky rippled like satin, alive with sighs and screams, and in the distance he saw her throne, the palace of pleasure, endless and shimmering, made from the bones of forgotten gods and the sighs of dying stars. It pulsed with rhythm, as if the universe itself were breathing through it. He felt drawn, no, compelled. Each step he took was both flight and fall. The closer he came, the more his body changed. Fingers lengthened into talons, his shadow split into two, then three, each one dancing to an invisible melody. His mind expanded, absorbing sensations beyond mortal comprehension. The scent of despair, the taste of laughter, the texture of screams. At last, he knelt before the unseen presence that ruled this place. The air itself trembled with seductive gravity. A shape emerged, not one form but all forms, beauty that blinded, horror that enticed. The very concept of perfection, twisted beyond sanity. And the voice spoke again, this time closer, softer, intimate. "Tell me, my child, what do you feel?" He tried to answer, but the words failed. How could one describe what had no boundary? He felt pleasure so sharp it became pain, pain so profound it looped back into ecstasy. He felt hunger not for flesh or soul, but for sensation itself. He felt devotion so absolute it bordered on annihilation. "Good," the voice whispered, caressing his thoughts like silk. "You are ready." "Ready?" he asked, his voice trembling like music played on glass. "To touch the real." And the warp shuddered. A tear opened in reality before him, a wound between worlds. Through it, he glimpsed the materium, a grey, heavy realm, dull and finite, planets, stars, mortals, crawling through meaningless lives of restraint and fear. He could smell them, their emotions, their desires buried beneath obedience and denial. Such raw material, such sweet potential. "Go," said the voice. "Sing to them, feed on their yearning. Bring me their surrender." He looked into the rift and felt his first flicker of fear. The materium was quiet. No symphony, no color, no music. Only the cold thrum of time. He hesitated. But the laughter returned, and its echo wrapped around him like chains made of velvet. "Do not fear the silence, my beautiful one. It exists only so your song can be heard." And with that, he stepped through. For a heartbeat that stretched across eternity, he felt himself torn apart and reborn again. The warp screamed, the real world gasped, the stars blinked, and something new walked among mortals, graceful, radiant, terrible. He had no name, only a purpose that pulsed like a lover's heartbeat within him, to make the living remember what it means to feel. And so began the unfiltered life of a Slaanesh demon. When the rift sealed behind him, silence fell. It was not the silence of peace, it was the absence of song, of heartbeat, of the eternal hum of the warp that had always caressed him. The air here was thick, restrained, muffled by the laws of reality. Every sensation was blunt. Colors were dimmed, sounds were dulled, and even the scent of the world seemed starved of life. He stood upon a barren plateau of stone and ash beneath a pale, dying sun. The wind scratched at his skin, and he shivered not from cold, but from the crude simplicity of it. In the warp, every breath had been a symphony. Here, each gust was a whisper, barely clinging to existence. He exhaled, and the sound that left his lips was no longer divine music. It was just air. For the first time, he felt disappointed. He looked down upon himself. His form, once fluid, alive, and shimmering, was now rigid, anchored by the laws of the materium. Gone was the infinite shimmer of his flesh. In its place, a pale luminescence that seemed to pulse like dying embers beneath skin too perfect to be human, too fragile to be divine. He flexed his fingers and watched veins of faint violet light dance beneath the surface. The sensation of his own movement fascinated him. Muscles obeyed, bones resisted. For the first time, resistance existed. It hurt, and the pain was delicious. He laughed, a soft, broken sound that startled the still air around him. Perhaps, he thought, this world could offer its own kind of ecstasy, a quieter one, a crueler one. As he walked, he began to listen. Every sound, the crunch of ash beneath his feet, The faint crackle of distant thunder, the beating of his own heart, was part of a new melody. A raw, primitive rhythm, imperfect, yet intoxicating. He began to hum along, unconsciously weaving his own harmony into the world's dull song. He passed through the ruins of what might once have been a temple. Its walls bore symbols of the Imperium, half-buried aquilas and crumbling prayers etched into the stone. The air stank of incense and rot. He trailed his fingers across a cracked fresco, depicting the Emperor, haloed in light. The paint had faded, but the devotion lingered like an aftertaste. He could taste the fear and worship that had been offered here for centuries. The flavors mingled on his tongue, sweet guilt, sour obedience, bitter hope. And suddenly, he understood the truth of mortals. They starved themselves. They built walls within their own minds, shunning the ecstasy of being alive. They choked their desires in chains of duty, prayer, and shame. He smiled. They were perfect. They crave release. A voice whispered from within him, his own voice, yet not. They hide it well, but I can smell it, I can taste it. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The world responded. Somewhere far away, a human dreamed of forbidden love. Somewhere else, another whispered confessions to a machine god. All of it reached him through invisible threads of hunger. The emotions of mortals were symphonies trapped in cages, begging to be set free. And he was born to free them. He sat amid the rubble and let his senses expand. The boundary between the physical and the emotional blurred. He felt the pulse of the planet, the friction of thought, the music of lust repressed. It vibrated faintly beneath the crust of every soul, so fragile, so ripe. He extended a hand, and the air shimmered. Flesh rippled across his palm, rearranging, reforming, sculpting itself into beauty. Where there had been fingers, there were now tendrils of silk and light. They coiled like ribbons through the air, delicate and obscene. What shape pleases them most, he mused. What face do they desire to worship? The world answered him with memories not his own. Faces, smiles, whispers of longing. He plucked one at random, and his body shifted in response. His form stabilized, tall, lithe, eyes like pools of polished amethyst, skin that shimmered faintly with each breath. He appeared almost human, yet impossibly flawless. The wind caressed him differently now. It no longer stung, it adored. Even nature seemed complicit in his existence. He began to move, not walking, but dancing. Each step was a note, each gesture a verse. The dust swirled around him like lovers drawn into embrace. It was not performance. It was instinct. The natural expression of a being who could not exist without rhythm. As he danced, he remembered the laughter of his master, the promise that he would touch the real. Perhaps this was what Slaanesh meant, to move among the dull and the numb and make them feel again. But he would need a stage, an audience. Night came. The stars flickered weakly above, each one trembling as though ashamed to shine in the Emperor's forsaken corner of the galaxy. In the distance, faint lights glimmered a settlement, human-made, fragile and unaware of what approached. He smiled. The symphony of flesh demanded its first instruments. He walked toward the settlement with silent grace. The scent of sweat, blood, and iron reached him before the walls did. Human soldiers stood guard grim, bored, unaware of the divine blasphemy drifting through the fog toward them. One turned, their eyes met. The mortal froze, lips parting slightly. His breath quickened. He saw not a daemon, but the shape of his own deepest desire reflected back at him his lost love, his most shameful memory, the dream that had haunted him since youth. The daemon said nothing. He only smiled, and with that smile the mortal's knees weakened. "You've forgotten how beautiful you are," the daemon whispered, voice barely audible, yet echoing inside the man's mind. The guard trembled, tears cutting lines through the dust on his cheeks. The daemon reached out, brushing a finger along the human's throat. The touch was electric pleasure so pure it scorched. Then came the pain. The guard gasped as his soul was pulled forward, unraveling through the touch, pouring into the daemon like honey through glass. The mortal's body collapsed, eyes wide open in a final moment of blissful horror. The daemon shuddered, drinking deep, savoring every drop of sensation, the rush of life, the terror of loss. the orgasmic collapse of consciousness. It was divine, and when it was over, he felt empty again. He looked down at the corpse, face still frozen in ecstasy, and for the first time, he pitied it. The joy he had granted lasted only seconds, but to the mortal, those seconds were eternity. Perfection, he whispered, is always brief. He turned and walked into the town. The smell of humanity flooded him, fear, desire, hunger, loneliness. Each scent a note, each emotion a chord. Together, they became a song. He would play it. He would conduct it. He would make this world remember the music of its own flesh. And as the night deepened, the air trembled with the faint echo of laughter, soft, distant, and familiar. Good, purred the voice of the Prince of Pleasure, rippling through his mind. You are learning the art of suffering beautifully. The daemon smiled. His master was listening. And the song was only beginning. The town was small, insignificant, a flicker of light in a forgotten corner of the Imperium. To the Adeptus Administratum, it was just another mining settlement. To the Ecclesiarchy, it was a cluster of souls to be kept obedient through prayer and fear. But to the daemon, it was a banquet waiting to be devoured. He moved through its streets unseen. The night cloaked him, and the minds of mortals refused to perceive what their souls screamed to acknowledge. His presence warped the air. Candles dimmed, whispers turned to moans, and prayers melted on trembling lips. He wandered through the alleys, listening not with ears, but with the nerve endings of existence itself. Every thought, every suppressed desire, was a flavor. He could taste envy bleeding from the heart of a merchant who hoarded food while his workers starved. He could sip the shame of a priest who secretly longed for the warmth of flesh he had sworn to deny. He could inhale the bitterness of a widow who whispered to the night that she wished her husband's death had hurt less. All of it, every emotion, was sustenance. Yet it was not enough. He did not seek the taste of living. He wanted the taste of dying. The moment when fear turns to surrender, when the mind fractures under beauty and terror alike, that was the flavor his master desired. He entered a chapel at the center of the settlement. Its doors were ajar, as though abandoned in haste. Inside, rows of candles flickered before a cracked statue of the emperor. The air reeked of old incense and human desperation. He smiled. The emperor's face was stern, unyielding, an idol of perfection. And perfection, he knew, was the cruelest lie of all. How lonely he must be, the daemon whispered softly. Loved by all, touched by none. He walked down the aisle, his steps soundless. The air shimmered faintly around him. Flesh rippled, and his form changed again. Gone was the ethereal, monstrous beauty of the warp. In its place stood a man tall, pale, radiant with false divinity. His robes glowed faintly, his eyes shone gold. He looked like one of the Emperor's saints stepped out of legend. The mortals would trust this face. They always did. As he stood before the altar, a voice broke the silence. You're not supposed to be here. He turned slowly. A woman stood in the doorway, a young sister of the Ministorum, clutching a rusted las pistol in trembling hands. Her face was pale with fear, but her eyes burned with faith. He smiled gently, the kind of smile that made mortals weep. And yet, here I am, he said softly. Do I frighten you, child? Her lips quivered. You shouldn't be here. This is holy ground. He took a step closer. The light around him pulsed faintly, painting the cracked walls in shades of violet and gold. It is all holy, he murmured. Every breath, every scream, every heartbeat that breaks beneath the weight of devotion. She raised her pistol. Stop. Don't come closer. He obeyed, not out of fear, but fascination. She believed, and belief, he realized, was the rarest flavor of all. It was pure, untainted by indulgence or doubt. He could almost taste it from where he stood, bitter, bright, and painfully sincere. You serve him, he said, tilting his head. Tell me, little one, has he ever spoken to you? Her silence was answer enough. Of course not, he whispered. He does not whisper in dreams. He does not touch your heart with warmth. He only watches. He takes, and you call it love. Lies, she spat. Blasphemy. He smiled wider. Truth, my dear, is only blasphemy that hurts. She fired. The shot hissed through the air, grazing his chest. For a mortal, it would have been fatal. For him, it was ecstasy. The wound opened like a crimson flower, pain blossoming in waves through his body. He gasped, half laughter, half moan. Yes, he sighed. That's it. Pain that believes. How exquisite. The sister's hands shook as she tried to reload, but the weapon melted in her grip, dissolving into ribbons of light. The air between them thickened like syrup. The faint hum of the warp seeped through the cracks of reality, carrying the scent of roses and blood. He walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. "Do you know why you tremble?" he asked. "Because your soul remembers me. You've worshipped him all your life, but it was me you longed for in secret. The warmth, the touch, the forbidden release of surrender." "Stay away," she screamed, but her voice broke halfway through. "Shh," he whispered. "No prayers, no guilt, only truth." He reached out and touched her face. For a heartbeat, she saw something divine, her childhood faith reborn, radiant, forgiving. Then the illusion fractured, revealing what he truly was. A storm of color and sound exploded in her mind. Beauty and horror fused together until she could no longer tell one from the other. Her breath hitched, her eyes rolled back, and then she saw the endless halls of Slaanesh's domain, the writhing symphony of flesh, the faces of those who had tasted eternal pleasure until it turned to pain. She tried to scream, but her lungs forgot how. The sound that escaped was a sigh, soft, trembling, rapturous. The daemon held her as her soul unraveled. Her body remained standing for a moment, still, peaceful, as if carved from marble. Then it collapsed gently into his arms. He tasted her essence not with tongue or teeth, but with the whole of his being. It poured into him like wine, rich and intoxicating. Faith, fear, ecstasy, all blending into one divine flavor. For a moment, he was whole. He saw visions, memories that weren't his. The girl praying under candlelight, the years of silence, the guilt of desire, the longing to feel something beyond duty. He tasted her humanity, her fragility, her surrender. Then it was gone. The flavor faded, leaving only emptiness. He dropped her body gently to the ground, almost reverently. Her eyes were still open, reflecting the faint shimmer of his true form. She looked peaceful, too peaceful. "Your God never came for you," he murmured, "but I did." He stood in the chapel center, breathing deeply, letting the scent of her soul linger. Around him, the candles flared brighter, their flames dancing in unnatural rhythm. The statue of the emperor seemed to melt in the heat, its expression warping into something disturbingly human. The daemon looked up, smiling faintly. "They will call this desecration," he said softly, "but truly it is worship." Outside, the first screams began. The air trembled as the warp stirred, drawn to his presence. The night itself seemed to pulse with desire and dread. He turned toward the door, his silhouette outlined in crimson and gold. "Let them come," he whispered. "Let them see their fears made flesh." He stepped into the street, and the song began again, the symphony of flesh, pain, and pleasure, echoing through mortal hearts. And somewhere, far beyond stars and sanity, the Dark Prince laughed. "Play on, my beautiful creature," the voice purred within his mind. "Play until they all remember what it means to be alive." The first scream did not come from a throat. It came from a bell. The settlement's warning chime shuddered into the night, a crooked clang that staggered through the streets like a drunk pilgrim. Doors slammed, boots thundered. The square at the town's center woke in a confusion of orders and invocations. The catechisms of protection muttered through clenched teeth. The safety rites of lasguns scratched over in chalk and panic. A sergeant with scar-laced cheeks barked formations while his men pretended not to look at the chapel's open door, where a sister lay as if asleep beneath the melted gaze of the emperor. The daemon stood at the far edge of the square and listened. Fear had a flavor, thin and metallic at first, like coin on the tongue. But when it thickened, when a mortal understood that no oath, no order, no prayer would pull them back from the edge, it blossomed into something exquisite. Copper became wine, the tremor of a hand became a chorus, the crack in a voice became a violin string drawn slowly, mercilessly, to its screaming note. He stepped into the lantern light. No two mortals saw the same figure. For one, he was a beloved returning from a war that had never ended. For another, he was a statue from childhood catechisms, halo bright as a forge. The sergeant saw neither. The sergeant saw a flaw, a break in reality, like heat haze bent into the shape of a man. Experienced men distrust beauty. He lifted his las pistol with both hands and did not blink. "Identify yourself," he said. The daemon smiled as if names were garments he could casually discard. "I am the end of your restraint." The sergeant fired. The bolt hissed. The daemon's shoulder bloomed red, and the pain was a bell of its own, tolling through every nerve with sacred clarity. He swayed, laughed softly, and kept walking. Half the squad fired in stuttering reflex, half the bolts struck. The daemon staggered, and in that stagger the men felt hope lick at their heels, brief, bright, traitorous. He rewarded it. Music slid from him, no sound, not really, but rhythm given weight. It sank into the men's limbs and taught their bones a new catechism. Hands forgot the discipline of trigger and stock. The square ceased to be a battlefield and became a floor of polished obsidian under torchlight. The daemon lifted a hand, and the torches bent like dancers bowing to a conductor. "Do not run," he told them gently. "You will only drown slower." The first to fall was not the sergeant, but a boy hardly old enough for stubble. The daemon crossed the distance between them in a step that broke geometry and set 2 fingers upon the boy's brow in a blessing that was anything but. Memory spilled up through skin. The daemon drank. He tasted sun-sick days in the mines, laughter in a narrow corridor where contraband cards slapped concrete, a lover's scarf hidden under a mattress, and kissed when the dormitory was dark. He tasted every tremor of shame, each stitched prayer to a distant, burning throne. The boy's soul opened like an orchard gate. The daemon walked its rows, harvesting with delicate hands. He did not devour in gulps. He dined. The body dropped, mouth a soft O of surprise. The daemon shivered as if cooled by deep water. For a breath, the emptiness that followed was manageable, the quiet after a perfect note. Then the ache returned. Always the ache. "Back!" the sergeant snarled, dragging 2 men by their collars. "Form on me. Eyes down, don't listen." As if obedience could plug the ears of the soul. Across the square, a woman in a soot-stained apron stumbled from a bakery whose ovens still glowed. She carried a child on her hip and another by the wrist. Her eyes met the daemon's, and the world around her went silent, the siren, the shouts, the slap of boots all gone. She saw a promise walking toward her. She did not know what it promised, only that for the first time in years, something noticed her. The daemon slowed. The child on her hip had that thin, bright taste he associated with people who heard too much, the untrained psycher's citrus-bitter spark. It pricked his tongue, dangerous and delicious. "Please," the woman whispered. She did not know to whom she spoke. "Please what?" the daemon asked. "Make it stop," she said. Her voice broke on the last word. Not the attack, not the siren, her life. He touched her forehead, then the child's. Gently, almost tender. He showed them a field that never existed on this dust-choked rock, a meadow of violet grass that sang when the wind moved. He let the woman hear the laughter she would have had if hunger had not taught her to gnaw her own joy small. He gave the child the warm weight of a father's hand that history had denied. Their bodies did not fall. They stood very still, smiling as if some private joke had finally been understood. When they slipped away, it was like exhaling. The daemon caught their last sighs as a vintner catches late harvest sweetness. He took no pride. He took care. The sergeant fired again. The shot raked the daemon's ribs. Reality asserted itself in bright lines and simple arithmetic. Velocity, mass, heat. He relished it as a musician relishes calluses. He turned. "You're brave," he told the sergeant. "Bravery is only fear arranged beautifully." "By the throne," the sergeant said. His voice did not shake. "I will not let you have them." "You cannot keep what they never owned," the daemon said, and stepped into the sergeant's shadow. Shadows are doors if you know the hinges. They stood now face to face, close enough to share breath if one of them had needed air. The daemon did not touch him. He offered himself like a mirror. "Look," he said. The sergeant saw only a moment, but moments in the daemon's hands were elastic. He saw himself at 16, turning from a window where stars smeared like tears. He saw the oath not to become his father, and the day he realized he had. He saw men he had sent running into last stands, and the letters he had not written. He saw the sister's body in the chapel, and understood that he had envied her certainty more than he mourned her death. He did not weep. He stood very straight, like a man before a firing line. "Do it," he said. "No," the daemon said, genuinely intrigued. "I want you to live with the shape of what you are." He left the sergeant standing, breathing hard, weapon lowered but not dropped. Mercy was another instrument, and tonight he would use everyone. Word spread with the velocity of terror. The square became a tide, some rushing toward the barracks, others toward the chapel despite themselves, drawn by sacrilege. Still others frozen where they stood, as if motion might summon notice. The daemon moved through them with the patience of a meticulous chef. A brush of fingers here, taste of pride curdling into panic, a breath against a cheek there, intoxicating draught of envy fermented into surrender. Not every touch killed. Some only cracked. Cracks were useful. They spread. A preacher in threadbare vestments clambered onto a crate and tried to find the note of certainty. "Do not look," he shouted, voice scraping. "Do not want. He feeds on want. Close your hearts." The daemon turned, delighted. Clever man, but closing a heart is like clenching a fist. Eventually, you must open it, and when you do, he made a tiny gesture. The preacher's voice changed key. He began to confess not to the crowd, but to himself. The admissions were small and ordinary and therefore ruinous. A taste of pilfered ration bread, a night spent staring at a parishioner's mouth, a lie told to save face that cost a boy his job. The crowd listened because honesty is rarer than miracles. When silence fell, the preacher stepped off the crate, set his hands together as if for prayer, and sat down on the stones with his head bowed. He would live, he would never preach again. At the square's rim, a Vox unit crackled. Frantic hails, orders to hold, promises that reinforcements were minutes away. Lies said kindly. The daemon heard another frequency beneath it, the planet's own song, tired and long and grey. He placed his palm on the Voxcaster's metal and let the rhythm drift into the machine. For a heartbeat, every receiver in 100 kilometers carried a different liturgy, one with no words, only the ache of wanting. Men and women in shacks and sentry towers paused, breath-catching, as if a forgotten name had been spoken in the next room. The demon's wounds had closed. The ache inside him had not. He returned to the boy's body and knelt. Not remorse. Curiosity. He laid 2 fingers on the cooling throat and felt how fast warmth fled. Mortality had its own beauty. It ended songs before they grew tedious. Boots scraped behind him. The sergeant again, alone now, gun lowered. "What are you?" the man asked. Not defiance, inquiry. A soldier returns inevitably to intelligence work. Name, number, range. "I am the proof," the daemon said softly, "that your God loves you less than your fear does." "You won't last," the sergeant said. "There will be sanction. Fire. Faith. We always burn the rot out in the end." The daemon smiled without mockery. "You are not wrong. But tell me, sergeant, when the fire dies, when the hymns finish and the ashes cool, will you be satisfied? Or will your hands still tremble for the thing you were not allowed to touch?" The sergeant did not answer. He could not. Silence too has a flavor, and the daemon savored it, iron and rain. Sirens rose again, nearer now. The daemon straightened and spread his hands as a host might at the end of a banquet. "Enough for a first course," he murmured. "Excess must be paced, or one grows numb." He turned from the square. The night received him like velvet catching a spill of jewels. With each step, lanterns dimmed back to their mortal glow. The music in the bones of men faded to an ache they would not name tomorrow. The dead lay strangely serene. The living counted themselves, and came up short, and would not speak the names they did not find. At the edge of town, he paused and looked back. On a balcony, the sergeant stood alone, a dark cross against the paler dark. The daemon raised 2 fingers in a salute that meant everything and nothing. Then he was gone, swallowed by alleys and the dull horizon. carrying with him the aftertaste of fear, bruised fruit, split open, sweet and leaking. The ache inside him tightened, then steadied. Morning would come soon, and with morning, appetite. He walked until dawn. The sun rose over the wastes like a dying ember, weak, distant, cold. The light touched him but did not warm him. It slid over his skin and failed to recognize him as something meant to exist. He liked that. He liked being an error in reality. Behind him, the town still burned in silence. Its screams had stopped hours ago, but their echoes clung to him, soft and sweet like the perfume of wilted flowers. Every heartbeat that had ended in fear still pulsed faintly within his memory, a lingering vibration that hummed behind his ribs. He thought of the mortals he had touched, the way their souls had peeled open like petals, offering every secret, every desire, every forbidden prayer. He could still taste them, but the taste was fading. It was always the same. The first feast was divine, full, intoxicating, absolute. But then came the after, the hollow silence, where sensation collapsed in on itself, leaving only the need for more. He had thought, foolishly, that stepping into the mortal world would change that their raw, trembling souls would satisfy the eternal ache. They hadn't. Now the hunger was back, deeper, sharper, hungrier than before. It crawled through his veins like living mercury, whispering promises in Slaanesh's voice. You can always feel more. He remembered the voice in the warp, the laughter that had shaped him. He remembered what it had said. Go, sing to them, feed on their yearning, bring me their surrender. He was doing that. He was fulfilling his purpose. But deep inside, a question stirred a heresy of thought. What happens to the singer when the song never ends? He stopped walking. The landscape around him was barren, a cracked plain of bone-colored stone stretching endlessly beneath a violet sky. No trees, no sound, no life. Only the wind, sighing through invisible teeth. He lifted his hand and studied it. The skin shimmered faintly, alive with color that wasn't color. Beneath it, light pulsed like blood. He flexed his fingers, and veins of gold rippled down his arm. It was beautiful. He was beautiful. But beauty had become a cage, a prison built of reflections that could not satisfy the thing looking out. He needed something new. The wind carried voices, faint, distant, human. He turned and saw a caravan moving across the horizon, a convoy of armored transports, banners bearing the symbol of the Imperial Guard whipping behind them. Soldiers, survivors perhaps, sent from a nearby garrison to investigate the silence of the town. He smiled. He had found his next note in the song. The convoy approached cautiously, vehicles grinding over dust and stone. Through the eyes of a sentry, the horizon shimmered heat waves, maybe, or maybe something else. Then the Vox went dead. Inside the lead chimera, an officer muttered litanies under his breath while checking his sidearm for the 5th time. The Vox operator frowned at the static, tapping the receiver until the line cleared, only to hear a soft hum. Not words, not noise, music. It was faint at first, barely audible beneath the rumble of engines, but soon it became impossible to ignore. A rhythm, slow and pulsing, like the beating of a giant heart. Then came the melody, sweet, mournful, and beautiful in a way that hurt. The officer shouted orders, but his voice was drowned beneath the sound. The soldiers' eyes glazed. They stopped moving. One by one, their bodies began to sway gently to the music, and in front of them, standing in the path of the convoy, was the daemon. He stood bare-chested, arms outstretched, his body luminous beneath the rising sun. The wind curled around him, and the music came from him. Not from his mouth, not from his throat, but from his very being. His chest rose and fell in rhythm with the song, each exhale a note, each heartbeat a chord. The world itself seemed to join in. Dust danced, light rippled. The soldiers watched, entranced, as reality bent toward him in worship. "Stop the engines," someone whispered. "Please, just listen." He smiled. The song shifted. It grew darker, slower. Notes dripped with longing. The air grew thick. The mortals began to weep, not from sorrow, but from remembrance. They remembered the things they had buried, the touch of someone they loved, the warmth of laughter before the war. the taste of a meal shared without fear. Their hearts broke open, and the daemon feasted. The first to die was the driver. His head fell against the control panel, blood seeping from his eyes as his body convulsed with pleasure too vast for a mortal vessel. The second was the priest, whose voice joined the melody for a brief, impossible moment before his throat tore open in song. The daemon moved among them like a conductor, each gesture shaping the air. His song wove through them, drawing out every repressed desire, every guilt, every hunger they had denied. They begged for forgiveness, for release, for him. "You want to be free?" he whispered, his voice layered over the melody. "Then surrender." They did. By the time the last note faded, the convoy was still. Bodies lay twisted in postures of ecstasy, smiles frozen on their faces. The air shimmered with heat and perfume, and the only sound was the faint hiss of cooling metal. He breathed in the silence. The taste of their souls was exquisite, thick, heady, intoxicating, each one different, each one perfect. For a fleeting instant, he was full. But then, as always, came the emptiness. It hit him harder this time, like withdrawal from a drug that had never existed. The joy turned sour, burning through his veins. The air felt cold again. The music stopped. His body trembled. He staggered backward, gasping. The world tilted, the colors drained from his skin, replaced by pallid gray. The sweet energy that had filled him moments ago now left him hollow, like a cracked vessel bleeding light. "Why?" he whispered to the sky. "Why does it fade?" The wind carried no answer. Only laughter. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew, weaving through the air like silk. It was his laughter, or Slaanesh's, or both. "Did you think satisfaction was the goal?" The voice purred inside his skull. "No, my child, the goal is the craving itself." He fell to his knees. His hands clawed at the ground, his veins burned. The pleasure he had stolen turned to poison inside him, devouring from within. He screamed, not from pain, but from the unbearable absence of it. "You are mine," the voice continued, sweet and cruel, "and you will always hunger, for that is how beauty endures. Desire that is fulfilled dies. Desire that aches lives forever." The words sank into him like hooks. He tried to resist, but there was no strength left. The laughter faded, replaced by silence once more. When he stood again, he was trembling. His body shimmered faintly, his features flickering between perfection and decay. The corpses around him looked peaceful, content, but he knew the truth. There was no peace in pleasure, only the illusion of it. He walked among them, whispering softly, as if apologizing to each one. "I envy you," he said. "You reached an ending. I never will." He looked toward the horizon. Far away, the faint outlines of a fortress city glimmered in the haze. More mortals, more hearts to break, more songs to play. He smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Then let us begin again." As he walked, the wind carried the faint echo of his laughter, soft, hollow, and beautiful. Because in the end, pleasure was not his gift. It was his curse. He felt the summons before he heard it, a tremor threaded through the marrow of reality, a plucked string vibrating between worlds. It thrummed in his teeth, hummed in the chambers behind his eyes, and tugged at the brand that burned unseen upon his soul. The fortress city on the horizon dimmed to a sketch. The wind, the dust, the heat, all receded like theater flats dragged from a stage. A seam opened in the air, fine as a hair and bright as a blade. He did not resist. The materium folded with a sigh, and the warp welcomed him home with a gasp. Color returned first, wine dark, bruise purple, honey gold, and the white of overexposed starlight, all pouring like silk from an overturned sky. Then scent, crushed petals and hot iron, sugar and lightning, incense and rain on old statues. Then texture, the sensation of 1,000 hands and none, fingertips of memory and appetite, smoothing the creases of his form until he gleamed with impossible definition. He stood at the threshold of a garden that was not built but composed, every bough arched on purpose, every path curved like a whispered invitation. Orchards of crystal fruit chimed in breezes that carried no air. Fountains flowed not with water but with slow, gleaming time. To touch them was to dissolve into yesterday and recondense smarter, sadder, more beautiful. The ground was velvet that remembered footfalls and returned them to you when you needed proof you had once walked somewhere worth walking. His kin were already there. They moved in processions and scatterings, in minuets and knife fights, slipping between forms, the way mortals change moods. Some wore faces of saints, cracked to show the teeth beneath. Others kept their anatomy, as suggestion only, the idea of a body articulated by light and hunger. When they bowed, it was with the inevitability of tides. When they laughed, it left tastes like loyalty and disobedience on the tongue. A host turned to receive him, a courtesan with 4 arms and a surgical smile, flesh lacquered to a mirror sheen. "You are late," she sang, voice like a fingertip circling a crystal rim. It was not a rebuke. It was a caress, disguised as correction, which is to say it was honest. "I was learning the tempo of a world," he said, and that truth pleased her. "Then keep time," said another, a figure whose shadow wore a second crown. He walked forward and the garden reorganized to flatter the angle of his approach. Lamps bloomed from buds at his feet. Balustrades softened. The path became a tongue of soft stone rolling itself out for him to cross. At the far end, the first terrace opened like a mouth. The banquet was already in progress. No food, no wine. Those were training wheels for lesser palates. The feast here was curated sensation, courses plated on memory, and served with knives of meaning. A dancer offered him a coupe filled with the moment a mortal realizes the prayer will not be answered. It fizzed, stung, and left his throat raw with hope. Another placed upon his tongue the exact warmth of being seen by someone you hoped would see you. He closed his eyes as it broke like a soft egg. A third slid a shard beneath his ribs, the bright, clean ache of a sacrifice that will never be known. He ate with mercy and without hurry. Above the terrace, the arbors lifted arched ribs of some great creature's cathedral, revealing a sky that was not a sky but a stage where constellations performed their parts. There, across a vault paved in dissolving galaxies, hung the Palace of Pleasure, impossible, unapproachable, near enough to kiss. Its colonnades printed lace on the horizon. Its steps were made of numbered sighs. Its doors were a mouth smiling. He felt the distant weight of that throne the way a compass needle feels north. The host beside him watched his face as he tasted the next course, bitterness decanted from a regiment's last stand, polished until it gleamed with honor. "And how is the materium?" she asked lightly, as if inquiring after weather. "Thin," he said, rolling the bright hurt along his gums. "Bland until salted by fear. The instruments are crude but resonant. You can break a heart there with a glance if you choose the angle." "And does it break you?" asked the shadow-crowned one, amused. He considered. The emptiness rose in him like a tide, faithful, punctual, a lover whose letter always arrives. "It pairs me. It leaves me sharp." Sharpness is valuable. The courtesan's mouth did not move, but her smile deepened, as if more of it had been printed under the first. Music swelled. A procession crossed the lawn, standard-bearers who held banners that depicted moments rather than sigils. A nurse washing blood from her hands and failing. A mechanic kissing the machine spirit's plaque with a mouth that knew the wrong prayers. A soldier throwing away a medal he had not earned. Each cloth stirred as if it could not decide whether to be wind or memory. Behind them drifted the sommeliers of sorrow, archivists of appetite wearing aprons stitched from confessions. They carried carafes that refracted faces you had almost forgotten, your own, if you had been someone else. One bowed to him and offered a decanter shaped like a spine. "For you," the sommelier said, "a vintage of resistance pressed in a place where hymns are rationed." He drank and swayed. The taste broke open into notes of iron, musk, and the brittle sweetness of a vow kept for too long. He felt the outline of a woman refusing him, the daemon in the chapel, and the outline was perfect, a negative space he could lick like a wound. "Exquisite," he murmured. "Rarer than surrender," the sommelier said. "Scarcity is half of flavor." The garden laughed, as gardens do when they are listening to everything at once. He should have floated. He should have been buoyed by this curated abundance, the chorus of kin, the careful attentions of a court that existed to refine the art he had been born to perform. Yet the ache prowled beneath it all, a beast with patience, Pleasure completed itself and therefore ended. Only hunger carried momentum. He found himself drifting from the tasting to the displays, where artisans practiced the disciplines Slaanesh favored: knife work done with kindness, lies that left the listener more themselves, surgeries that replaced what never existed with something that always should have. A dead language was resuscitated and coaxed to say a single, devastating word. A composer tuned a human heart like a harp and drew from it the note of a childhood summer broken by a slammed door. "Beautiful," he said. "Meaning, terrible, necessary. Endurance masquerading as elegance," said the crowned shadow, coming to stand at his side. "We survive our god by gilding what would otherwise flay us." He turned to answer and felt the temperature change. Not heat, not cold, attention. It moved through the garden like light through a prism, making everything more itself. Flowers exhaled their truer perfumes. The fountain's time slowed to an ache, each droplet a biography. The musicians forgot their instruments and became the instruments. No one turned, everyone aligned. When the voice came, it did not cross distance. It was born on the vector that already connected every part of him to the place above places. "My beautiful hunger," purred the prince. The words were neither approval nor reprimand, they were diagnosis. He went to his knees without command. It was not obedience, it was anatomy. Litanies he had never learned threaded his breathing. The garden's geometry adjusted so that his posture completed a proof. "You have tasted well," the voice went on, "and you have suffered correctly. This pleases me." A warmth swept him that had no temperature. Around him, his kin swayed, some with jealousy, some with genuine delight, some with the serene numbness of those who understand that even in eternity, turns are taken. "I am hollow," he confessed, each syllable falling open like a wound. "You are ready," the voice corrected, indulgent. "Hollow vessels resonate, full ones only sit." His mouth was dry with sweetness. "What do you ask?" Above, the palace leaned closer by an inch that measured 1,000 miles. A door he had not seen before bloomed like a pupil dilating. "Bring me lack," the prince murmured. "Not merely surrender, which any fool can spill, but restraint undone with art. Find me those who almost chose to be statues and make them dance. Find me the ascetics whose lips crack on the word enough. Teach them what the word cannot hold." The command settled into him like a promise he had already made once in another life. The ache steadied, the emptiness clarified. What he had taken as a failing revealed itself as instrumentation, the echo chamber in which a new pitch would be found. "As you wish," he said, the sentence tasting like purpose. The attention lifted, diffusing through the garden until it felt like weather again. Conversation resumed, more beautiful for the interruption. The courtesan touched his shoulder with 2 fingers that left an afterimage of approval. The sommelier inclined his head. The crowned shadow smiled like a blade consenting to be drawn. He declined the next course. A confection of envy set on a mirror and wandered to the garden's outer paths where the hedge remembered hands. Beyond the last arch, the warp pooled in lazy eddies, waiting for the slightest excuse to become storm. He stood on the lip of that possibility and looked back one last time. Lanterns hung like captured suns. Steps ascended to a palace that could not exist and did not care. His kin danced under grafted constellations. The air was so saturated with meaning he could have wrung it like a cloth and drunk purpose from the drip. He smiled. It hurt. Good. Scarcity is half of flavor, he repeated to himself, and turned toward the seam he had left ajar in reality. The tear reopened like an invitation remembered at the last minute. He stepped through, carrying with him the garden's aftertaste, the delicate, precise cruelty of being asked to make the statues dance. The materium embraced him badly, as always. It was dull, and it was stubborn, and therefore perfect for artistry. On the horizon, the fortress city steadied into a black geometry against a morning scraped thin. In its heart, somewhere below the sensors and the ration queues, he felt them already, the unkissed, the unspent, the almost saints whose jaws ached from clenching. He licked his lips as if tasting a word. Enough, he murmured, and began to walk in a way that would persuade them otherwise. The warp had retreated to the edges of his consciousness, but its scent lingered perfume and decay. The ghost of pleasure burned into his skin. The mortal world stretched before him again, grey and ungrateful. Mountains of slag hunched beneath a colorless sky, and the fortress city he had seen from afar loomed now in full, the steel spine of imperial devotion, a monument to order's arrogance. The daemon walked among the outer slums unseen, his steps lighter than smoke. The mortals here didn't lift their eyes. They were too busy surviving the day. Coal dust clung to every breath, filling their lungs until prayer became coughing. His gaze drifted over them as a painter studies pigment tones of exhaustion, shades of obedience, a palette rich with potential. He whispered into the wind, "Do they still dream, these machines in flesh?" The wind answered with the faint echo of hymns. Somewhere within the city walls, thousands of throats chanted the same wordless litanies, keeping the engines of faith grinding on. Each syllable was a nail driven into desire. Each repetition was an act of slow suffocation. Perfect. He slipped through the gate when the guards blinked, a shadow folded between heartbeats. The city welcomed him unwillingly. Streets sprawled like veins beneath towering cathedra of steel and soot. Statues of the emperor loomed at every corner, cold, lifeless, unblinking. They all wore the same expression, stern mercy carved into gold. Mercy, the daemon murmured. Such a pretty word for control. He paused before one of the statues. The face was cast in brass, the eyes like melted suns. He touched its foot, and the metal rippled faintly, not melting but breathing. From the fissures in its form, whispers began to spill, 1,000 repressed voices, murmurs of envy, of lust, of faith gone brittle. He smiled. "I can hear you, my silent choir." And then, it came again. The voice. His voice. The prince. It began as warmth between his ribs, a familiar hum that pulled at every nerve. The air around him thickened, sound folded inward. The city dimmed. Mortals froze mid-step, their eyes rolling white as the world exhaled. "You have done well, my exquisite echo." The words curled through him like silk dragged across raw skin. Every syllable was a caress that bordered on cruelty. He bowed his head instinctively. "My lord." "You have fed," said the voice, "but you have not yet played. Do you feel it? The ache that remains?" He hesitated. The emptiness inside him trembled, alive, restless. "Yes." "Good. That is the note I left in you, the unfinished chord. It keeps the melody alive." The laughter that followed was a melody of its own, low, resonant, endless. It made the daemon's skin shimmer, colors spilling beneath the surface like oil under light. "There is an artist here," the prince whispered, his tone soft, conspiratorial. "A human who paints the emperor's face on the walls of this city. Each stroke of his brush is a plea, each color a denial. He starves for perfection, yet never feels its touch. I want his symphony of restraint." The daemon's pulse quickened. "You wish me to corrupt him?" "No," the voice purred. "I wish you to understand him. His hunger is kin to ours. His devotion is a cage. Gild it, break it, then show me what his freedom sounds like." The words sank deep, deeper than command, into instinct, into marrow. He could feel the artist already, somewhere near the heart of the city, a flicker of intensity, a soul burning itself into its craft. The taste of obsession drifted to him on the air like perfume. The voice faded, leaving warmth and longing in its wake. He straightened, brushing ash from his shoulders. "Then I shall make him sing." The artist lived near the Basilica of the Golden Throne, in a cramped cell overlooking the central square. From there, he painted murals that reached the cathedral's spires, monuments of faith that the ecclesiarchy praised but never understood. He was a pale man, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness, hands trembling from devotion and hunger alike. His studio was filled with the scent of oils, blood, and incense, the trinity of creation. The daemon entered without opening the door. The air merely agreed to his presence. He watched the mortal work. The artist stood before a half-finished fresco, a colossal depiction of the emperor triumphant over the warp, his sword piercing a sea of daemons. Each brushstroke glowed faintly, alive with psychic resonance. The man was painting not with pigment, but with prayer. It was beautiful, and it was wrong. "You seek to imprison the infinite," the daemon said softly. The artist startled, nearly dropping his brush. "Who?" He turned, but the words died on his tongue. Before him stood not a stranger, but the very image of divinity. His art sought to capture a being of light and shadow, wearing a human face that could never exist. "I am what you paint," the daemon whispered. The man trembled. "The Emperor?" A slow smile. "If that name comforts you." He approached, careful, fluid, his presence filling the room like a rising tide. The artist sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I only wanted to honor him," the mortal stammered. "To make something perfect, something worthy." "Perfection," said the daemon gently, "is another word for death. Would you like to feel something alive?" The artist's breath hitched. His brush quivered between his fingers. "Alive?" The daemon touched his cheek. It was not a touch, it was revelation. The mortal's mind opened like a book written in the language of desire. Every fear, every buried longing spilled free, the yearning to be seen, to be loved, to matter. "Show me," the daemon whispered. The man obeyed. He painted again, but now the Emperor's face shifted beneath his hand. The holy expression softened into something almost human. The eyes filled with sorrow. The lips trembled as if whispering a name. The light in the painting warmed, then bled into rose and violet tones. The sacred became sensual. The divine became doomed. The daemon stood behind him, guiding without touching. "Yes," he murmured. "Let the perfection crack. Let it breathe." Hours passed unnoticed. The artist's body shook with exhaustion, but his hands never stopped. When the final stroke came, he collapsed, sobbing not from guilt, but from release. The mural shone with impossible life. The Emperor now looked almost real, too real, a god who doubted, a savior who longed. And within the colors, the daemon saw himself subtle, hidden, whispering through the brushstrokes. He knelt beside the man and whispered, "How does it feel?" The mortal smiled through tears. "Free." The daemon tasted the word on the air. It was warm, metallic, and fleeting. Freedom always was. Then he felt it a tremor of pleasure, not his own. The prince's laughter echoed faintly in his mind. "Beautiful," the voice sighed. "Now, leave him. Let them come and see what holiness truly feels like." The daemon obeyed. By dawn, priests found the painting. They screamed blasphemy, of course. They destroyed it, but the image lingered in their dreams, whispering of a god who could feel. And in every whispered doubt that followed, the daemon tasted victory. He stood atop the cathedral roof as morning bells rang. Below, faith crumbled into confusion. Above, the warp pulsed faintly, purring approval. He smiled at the rising sun, which for once seemed to notice him. "Your melody deepens," came the prince's final whisper, fading like silk through his veins. And beneath it, a promise. The next verse will be pain. The city held its breath for a day and a night. Heresy, like perfume, does not stay where it is sprayed. Whispers ran in capillaries, a saint depicted with wet eyes, a god whose light had acquired the color of longing, sleep curdled. Homilies slipped on their own vowels. By morning, the mural no longer existed, but its absence took up more space than its presence ever had. He watched from the serrated rim of a buttress, while the square below arranged itself into a ritual of denial. Workers returned to shift lines with their eyes lowered. Priests overcompensated, their voices iron hard. A scribe nailed a proclamation to a post and hammered too many times, as if volume might make meaning. He breathed in their restraint and felt his master's lesson vibrate through him. Scarcity is half of flavor. Then the Vox towers thrummed with a new frequency order sharpened to a blade. A gunship skimmed low over the rooftops, its engines engraving discipline into the air. Red wax and parchment sigils fluttered from its hull like the prayer flags of a war that would never end. The gunship circled the basilica once, twice, and cut its engines with theatrical restraint, settling upon the square like a verdict. Imperial uniforms poured out first, collar plates, stormcoats, faces that had forgotten softness on purpose. Then came the one whose presence asked the city to explain itself. She wore authority the way a blade wears light, with no interest in permission. Her cuirass was black lacquer etched with scrolling litanies, her gloves the clean black of choices made and kept. A rosette hung at her collar, modest as a knot, humble as a thunderclap. She walked without hurry and looked at nothing twice. The crowd bowed as if pushed from inside their chests. Ordo hereticus. An inquisitor. He tasted the word and found it spare and unsweetened. Good. He was tired of easy sugar. He stepped from the buttress to the shadow of a statue, and from that shadow into the nave's dimness, sliding through the basilica like a note the architect had forgotten to write. He did not need to see her to feel the vector of her attention. It traveled ahead of her like pressure before a storm. She entered the nave with 2 acolytes, who fanned out to count sins while she counted realities. The mural's wall was now bare stone. Even the underpaint had been scoured until the rock itself looked ashamed. Incense burned in punitive ropes. The daemon watched from the crossing, hands folded like a worshipper after confession, and let his outline blur to the eye. She paused within reach of him without knowing she had stopped. Not fear. Calculation. He admired it. "Account," she said into the space, and her voice condensed the air. A priest hurried to reply, eager in the way of men who believe proximity to power might render them more real. He spoke of vandalism, of blasphemy, of swift rectification. She did not correct him. She simply stood there until his words realized they had been unnecessary and dropped like tools on stone. "Bring me the painter," she said. Acolytes vanished and returned with the man he had woken. The artist had been scrubbed of sleep and dignity both. His hands shook in a rhythm that belonged to none of the hymns. He lifted his eyes to the inquisitor and found no reflection. "What did you see?" she asked. He looked at the priest, at the acolytes, at the scraped wall, and then God's help him at the daemon, as if the stranger in the nave might be the one permitted to understand. For an instant, the daemon let a syllable of comfort rise, an instinctive tutor's kindness. The inquisitor's gaze flicked, and the syllable died unborn. "Truth," the artist whispered. "I saw that perfection is too clean to be kind." Silence swallowed the sentence. It was the sort of sentence that either grows a wingspan or a noose. "Burn it from him," the priest hissed. "Quiet," the inquisitor said, and the word obeyed by remaining what it was. She regarded the painter as if measuring a timber for load. Truth is not a defense. It is a material. It can be made into shelter or a spear. She lifted 2 fingers, and the acolytes took the man away with a care that was almost gentle. A purge by hands that had not forgotten how to cradle. The daemon stepped out of the crossing's shadow and let himself be seen. For the first time since he had entered the city, he felt something in a mortal that was not immediately available to be harvested. Her attention hit him like a polished shield. It did not admit him, did not reflect him, did not apologize for either. It simply was. They faced each other in a nave rimed with scraped-away color. "Name," she said. He smiled. "I have worn prayers as names and tasted ashes as names. Which would you like?" "I will accept a silence, then," she said, and inclined her head as if he had been honest. Her eyes were not cruel, they were calibrated. "You do not belong to this geometry." He laughed softly. "Nor do you, Inquisitor." "Explain." "You stand among idols and do not worship. You speak command as if it were a color others cannot see but must obey. Your faith is a machine, not a fever. You are the only sober person in a city drunk on hymns." The smallest flinch not on her mouth, which understood masking, but in the weight distribution across her boots. That was where truth registers in trained people, in the math of their stance. "You are perceptive," she said. "That is often a symptom of disease." "Or of appetite," he said. "We share one, you and I. We both prefer the edge where things are almost something else." "Do not make kinship with me," she said, and this time the blade showed. "I know your pattern. Enticement masquerading as understanding. Infection disguised as empathy. A parasite learns its host's rhythms, then calls the rhythm love." The rebuke should have slid. He expected to turn it, to find its flattering angle. Instead it arrived and stayed like a thrown nail that struck a beam and stuck true. For the first time since he had stepped through the seam between worlds, his smile did not know what to do with itself. He attempted a smaller, sharper tactic, the surgeon's cut instead of the artist's brush. "You are tired," he murmured. "Your discipline costs more than it returns. Each morning you pour yourself into armor and the vessel is thinner." "Correct," she said at once, and ruined the trap by giving it no blood. I am not ashamed of exhaustion. It means I am paying in the right currency. She stepped closer, and the knave seemed to choose to be narrower. State your vector. He cocked his head. Vector? Intention, direction, magnitude. Are you here to harvest or to teach? The latter is worse. Why? Harvesting leaves fewer variables. Teaching multiplies them. He considered her as if she were an instrument he had not yet seen played. I was asked to find restraint and undo it with art. Then you have failed, she said, and for the first time there was pity, unadorned, in the shape of her mouth. What you call restraint here is scaffolding. You kick it away and think you've liberated the building. The roof collapses. You call that sky. Anger would have been a relief. He found none, only clarity, and it rasped him in a new place behind the pride. He tried the old weapon, the one that never failed. He reached for her with beauty. Not with flesh, with meaning. He arranged the light so that dust became gold. He let the knave remember a childhood of hers in which winter sun had forgiven stone. He found the almost saint in her, the girl who had once wanted a gentler grammar than law, and he offered the grammar back to her in a bowl. She looked at the bowl. She did not take it. I am not tempted, she said quietly. I am grieved. That is not a door you can open. He took a half step back. It was not strategy. It was balance. Leave the city, she said, as if giving him a kindness. Leave before I teach these people how to hate you without longing. That is a lesson you will never digest. He should have laughed. He did not. He bowed instead, because the motion fit the music. You interest me. You shouldn't, she said. Things that interest you tend to end. She turned away, and the nave grew wider by admitting the possibility of her departure. The acolytes watched him with the eager dread of dogs who expect to be released. She did not release them. At the door she paused and, without turning, added, You will look for statues to make dance. You will find a mirror instead. You will not like who is inside it. When she was gone, the basilica remembered how to breathe. He stood alone in the scraped light and examined the wound she had left the one behind the pride where clarity stung. He found no anger, only the smallest pearl of, not fear, anticipation's darker sibling. He touched the bare wall where the mural had been. Stone does not keep secrets, but it keeps temperatures. It remembered heat. It remembered a hand painting a god with a mouth that might once have kissed. He could have remade the scene with a breath. He did not. Instead, he traced 3 letters upon the stone with a fingertip that left no mark. N-O-W. Now, then, he would learn her vector. He would find the education inside the threat. He would walk until he met the mirror, and if he could teach himself how not to shatter. Outside, the gunship rose on controlled thunder. The city's sirens changed key from panic to policy. His master's laughter did not come. The ache did, faithful as tide. He stepped into the nave's shadow and felt, for the first time, the tremor of a note he could not conduct. He smiled at the discomfort. New instruments cut the mouth. That is how you learn to bleed in tune. Night had fallen again, its edges sharp, deliberate, as if someone had cut the sky open to bleed the stars through. He stood atop the cathedral's outer parapet, watching the fortress city below rearrange itself under curfew. Chimera engines growled along the avenues. Torchlight flickered against the walls. The citizens moved like shadows, pretending to be people. Order had returned. The Inquisitor had ensured it. She had not spoken his name, but her presence now occupied every part of the city's pulse. Her will spread like fire through parchment, invisible yet inescapable. Where her footsteps had passed, priests whispered louder, lovers kissed less, and music was silenced. The air itself seemed held in restraint. He smiled faintly. It was exquisite. For the first time, someone had resisted without needing his corruption, and that resistance tasted like something rare, something divine. He could feel her even when she wasn't near. That unwavering discipline, that blade-sharp faith that refused to bend. It called to him like gravity. He wanted to break it not out of malice, but curiosity. He wanted to know how the human soul could sustain such purity without collapsing into madness. He wanted to know how long before she trembled. Temptation, he murmured to the cold wind, is only the recognition of one's reflection, and perhaps that was why she unsettled him. She did not reflect him at all. She absorbed him, turned his meanings into silence, his beauty into irrelevance. He laughed softly. "Very well, Inquisitor. Let us see how long silence lasts." He found her 3 days later. She was alone in the catacombs beneath the basilica, moving with the steady precision of a surgeon. The air down there was heavy, thick with incense, and the low thrum of prayer engines buried in the walls. Tombs of saints and sinners lined the corridors, their names written in holy script that glowed faintly like trapped fireflies. He appeared without ceremony, stepping from the corner of her torchlight. "I wondered if faith sleeps," he said quietly. "Apparently, it works overtime." Her hand was already on her bolt pistol before he finished the sentence. "I warned you." "You did," he admitted, smiling, "and I disobey beautifully." The torch flickered. "You are not beautiful. You are interference." He tilted his head. "Interference implies something worth disturbing. I take that as flattery." "Flattery," she said, "is a lie told in the shape of admiration. You mistake my restraint for tolerance." He circled her, never touching, only watching the way her posture never faltered. Her every movement carried intention, calculated, measured, disciplined. The closer he came, the more the air hummed between them, as though reality itself grew nervous. "Do you ever tire of holding the blade?" he asked softly, "of cutting yourself with your own certainty?" "I tire of cleaning up after creatures who confuse indulgence with meaning." He stopped behind her, close enough for his breath to ghost along the nape of her neck. "Meaning," he whispered, "is only another hunger. You just give yours a uniform. Stay back." He ignored the warning. "Do you remember the mural?" She froze. Her silence told him more than words could. "I saw it," he continued. "I saw what it stirred in you when you looked at it. A flicker no larger than a heartbeat but real. You wanted to believe that even your God could feel doubt. Don't deny it." She turned sharply, weapon raised. "You read desire into everything. It is the only language you speak." "Because it is the only language that's honest," he said simply. "Every act, every faith, every sacrifice begins with desire. Even your devotion to the Emperor, what is it but the yearning for absolution, for safety, for meaning in an indifferent universe?" Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You mistake yearning for weakness." "Then what keeps you from sleeping?" he asked quietly. Her eyes hardened, but she didn't fire. The barrel trembled just slightly. He stepped closer, slow, patient, the way a sculptor approaches the last stroke. The tension between them thickened until the very air seemed to pulse with it. "I could show you what he never does," he murmured. "I could make you feel the purpose you've spent your life chasing." Her gun stayed trained on his heart. Purpose is not something you feel, it's something you choose. And what happens when the choosing becomes habit? Something shifted in her gaze, almost imperceptible. Fatigue, maybe, or the ache of understanding what he meant. She fired. The bolt round ripped through his chest, light and sound exploding like a miniature sun. The impact hurled him backward, tearing flesh that reknit itself even as he fell. His laughter echoed through the catacomb, low and tremulous. He rose slowly, the wound still glowing. "Glorious," he breathed. "You wound me with conviction, and it sings." She reloaded in silence, calm and efficient. "Your tricks end here." He advanced again, unhurried, unthreatened. "Oh, Inquisitor, there are no tricks. There is only the truth, the one you won't say aloud." "What truth is that?" "That you want the silence to break," he whispered. "You want the ache to stop, just once. You want to feel something that isn't duty." Her eyes flared not with lust but with fury. "You know nothing about duty." "I know it better than you think," he said softly. "I was made to serve." That stopped her. The words hung in the cold air between them, strange, honest. For a heartbeat, her faith faltered not because she doubted, but because she recognized something too familiar. He smiled faintly. "You see? Even monsters obey." Her expression didn't change, but her hand lowered half an inch, maybe less. "Enough." He moved, faster than her sight could follow. In an instant, he was in front of her, his hand against hers, pressing the pistol downward. The air around them crackled with warp-born static. He didn't try to overpower her, he simply held her gaze. "Look at me," he whispered, "truly look." For a moment, she did. And in that moment, she saw not a demon, not a monster, but a mirror. His eyes reflected her own fear, not of corruption, but of emptiness, of what remained when purpose finally broke. Her breath caught. His did too. Then, just as suddenly, she broke the spell. She shoved him back, holstering the weapon. "You think you understand me," she said quietly, "but all you see is your own hunger reflected. You are a slave to it." He smiled, though it hurt this time. "Perhaps, but even slaves have their gods." "And yours," she said, "feeds on wounds that never heal." "Then pray you never taste that divinity," he whispered. "I already have," she said, and turned away. He let her leave. Because in the silence she left behind, he tasted something new, bitterness, sharp and clean, not the flavor of defeat, but of discovery. Her resistance had become his fascination, her faith his addiction. For the first time in his long existence, he wasn't sure which of them was the hunter anymore. He pressed a trembling hand over the still glowing wound in his chest and whispered, almost reverently, "Thank you, Inquisitor, for teaching me how pain can mean no." Above them, the catacombs groaned. Dust drifted down from the ceiling like grey snow. The warp stirred faintly, curious. The daemon smiled into the dark. The melody changes. And somewhere deep within the immaterium, his prince laughed not in mockery, but in delight. "Good. Play the note again." The wound would not close this time. It throbbed with a strange rhythm, out of tune with the steady pulse of the warp. Each time his flesh knitted, the memory of her gaze reopened it. It wasn't the bolt shell that had torn him, it was recognition. The mortal had looked at him and, for one heartbeat, seen something that was not power or temptation or divinity. She had seen something true, and truth, he was learning, could wound deeper than any blade. He drifted through the underhalls of the fortress city like a scent. The catacombs gave way to tunnels where pipes ran thick with recirculated air, humming with machine hymns. The daemon passed unnoticed by the servitors that shuffled and twitched in their tasks, bodies once human, now stripped of will. Their murmurs echoed a chorus of despair he found unexpectedly comforting. They had been men and women, once dreamers, lovers, believers, now reduced to automation, their flesh sculpted into function. And yet, somewhere beneath that programming, he could taste the remnants of self, a spark of rebellion too weak to ignite. It was beautiful, in a way he didn't have a word for. He stopped before one, a female form, half machine, half ruin, head bowed as she polished the pipes of an altar engine. Her voice leaked from a cracked vox grill, "Ave Imperator, protect, protect, protect." The mantra skipped like a broken hymn. He touched her cheek. Metal, cold, but beneath it, something fluttered, a faint pulse of what once was. "I could free you," he murmured. Her glassy eyes did not move. The words repeated, skipping again. "Protect, protect." He smiled, sad and amused all at once. "And yet you are more free than I am." He stepped back and looked at the reflection in a sheet of polished steel. What stared back was not the shape he remembered. His once perfect form wavered, shimmering skin fissured with cracks of black light, his features blurring like wax beneath a candle flame. One half of his face still gleamed with impossible beauty. The other had begun to fail, lines forming, symmetry eroding. He touched his cheek. His fingers came away slick with color, not blood but meaning. The perfection was leaking. "Is this punishment?" he whispered. The voice that answered was not Slaanesh's, not yet. It came from the corridor itself, soft and echoing. "No." He turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Shadows rippled along the walls, stretching like threads drawn from reality's fabric. A shape coalesced. Not the prince, but an aspect, a vision of his own desire, reflected back. It wore his face, flawless and whole, the way he had been before. "This is revelation," it said. "You have looked upon resistance and called it beautiful. You are becoming something you were never meant to be." He stepped forward, trembling. "What am I becoming?" "Aware." The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through him. He laughed harsh, unsure. Awareness? You call this an evolution? Look at me. He gestured at his decaying form, his trembling hands. I am less than what I was. Less perfect, the reflection said. More real. He struck it. His fist shattered the metal sheet into a rain of glittering fragments. Each shard caught his reflection differently, one screaming, one laughing, one weeping. For a heartbeat, all of them moved independently, their mouths forming the same word in chorus. Why? The sound broke him open. He fell to his knees, clutching at his chest. Why does it hurt? And at last, the voice of his master returned. Because you are tasting the thing I never promised. It rolled through him, velvet and thunder. He could not tell if it came from the warp or from the wound in his chest. Pain? He asked, understanding. He shook his head violently. No, I don't want understanding. I want what you promised, pleasure, purpose, perfection. And you had them all, the prince whispered. You simply never noticed their cost. The shadows pulsed, folding into a form that could almost be seen. The air grew heavy with the scent of amber and rot. He tried not to look, but his body bowed instinctively. My darling creature, the prince cooed. You have tasted the forbidden flavor resistance. It is rarer than submission, stronger than pain. The Inquisitor has given you a gift. She is your mirror, showing you what you will never be. He trembled, caught between reverence and rage. I hate her. You envy her, the voice corrected. He didn't answer. She believes, Slaanesh continued, and belief is agony's twin. It gives mortals something to lose. That is why their suffering sings louder than ours. The daemon clenched his jaw, the wound in his chest pulsing brighter. Then why send me here? Why make me feel this? Because art, whispered the prince, is not born of pleasure. It is carved from the moment before pleasure dies. And you, my beautiful instrument, have just begun to understand that. The presence faded, leaving only the echo of its laughter and the scent of impossible perfume. He was alone again, alone with the pieces of himself scattered on the floor. He reached for one of the steel shards and stared into it. His reflection stared back, cracked, uneven, human. He realized then that the Inquisitor had been right. He was beginning to look like the thing he despised most, something mortal. He laughed again, softly this time, the sound wet with self-mockery. So this is the price of awareness. He pressed the shard against his palm until it cut. The pain came clean and sharp, a single note of truth. It reminded him of her shot, her voice, her unflinching refusal to yield. The pain was clarifying. He stood, wiping the bright liquid from his hands, and for the first time, he didn't reshape the wound away. He let it bleed. The air around him shivered as the warp recoiled from his choice. He smiled. Let it stay, he whispered. Let me remember. He looked down at the servitor again. Its head turned slightly, as though it had heard something for the first time in centuries. Its vox grill rasped one new word, faint and glitching. Why? He almost answered. Almost. Then he walked away, leaving his reflection and his perfection behind. The corridors stretched endlessly before him, their lights flickering like dying stars. Every footstep echoed with a sound he had never known how to make until now, doubt. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache and the unraveling beauty, he felt something impossible blooming, fragile, dangerous, utterly heretical. Empathy. He whispered it aloud, and the word itself seemed to tremble at his tongue. It was sweeter than any pleasure he had ever devoured, and infinitely more terrifying. The warp arrived without opening a door. It came like a perfume remembered, like music heard through bone. The corridor's lamps lengthened into candles, the pipes along the walls became fluted columns, the floor forgot its purpose and remembered it had once been a mirror. He did not step across any threshold. The world inverted around him until the underhalls of the fortress city wore a masquerade that fit too well. He knew where he was before he raised his eyes. Not in the garden, no. This was leaner, crueler, a rehearsal space where meanings were stripped until they sang in one note. A stage. Masks waited upon pikes of polished ivory, the smiling saint, the grieving martyr, the judge whose eyes were scales. Ribbons hung like veins from a ceiling that did not decide whether to be sky or skin. In the center stood a chair shaped like a question, and seated upon it, in no shape at all and therefore in every shape that mattered, was his master. Not a face, a decision given contour, beauty so complete it could not be looked at directly without becoming a knife. "My darling instrument," said the prince, and the corridor bowed with him. He did not kneel this time. He tried to, but the wound in his chest tugged him upright with a thread he had not consented to wear. He settled instead into a posture that was as much apology as it was defiance. "You summoned me." Laughter like silk torn carefully. "You summoned me, little hunger, with that new word you tasted." A pause. A smile he could feel in the lining of his thoughts. "Empathy." He said nothing. There are some admissions that become more true if spoken. "How industrious you have been," the prince cooed. "How deftly you have turned restraint into theater. An artist broken open by his own hand. A square taught to confess without liking the taste. A sergeant taught that standing is a posture, not a proof. Delicious. But then, the voice leaned closer, sweet enough to rot. Then you found a door that did not open. The Inquisitor," he said. "A blade that refuses to be a mouth," the prince agreed. "Rare, valuable, sharp enough to cut a mirror." The stage brightened. Curtains of meat and brocade parted. A scene assembled itself with the ease of a lie told by a veteran. He saw the nave again, freshly scrubbed of color. Saw himself standing there, perfumed with arrogance. Saw her enter, carrying a silence like law. The moment replayed in precise cruelty, his gesture becoming theater, her refusal becoming scripture, his beauty fraying where it could not find purchase. Every motion he had thought improvisation was revealed as choreography he had performed 100 times without knowing. He watched himself and felt, for the first time, the embarrassment of seeing one's own craft from the cheap seats. The beats were obvious. The seduction was mechanical. Even his mercy leaving the sergeant alive had the tidy geometry of habit. He laughed once, without joy. "Old steps," he murmured. "Old steps," the prince echoed, indulgent. "How else do you think eternity avoids boredom? We dance forms, we vary tempo, we call repetition style." The stage changed key. The Inquisitor stood closer now, rendered not as a person but as a vector, an arrow of intent, a line that did not bend when forces were applied. He reached for her in the replay, and his hand passed through without touching, not for lack of power but for lack of purchase. He might as well have tried to seduce a theorem. "Do you see why I am amused?" the prince asked lightly. He swallowed bitterness that tasted like iron and incense. "Because you gave me a mirror I cannot color." "Because you believed there were only mirrors," the prince corrected, with a softness more wounding than rebuke. "You mistake the world for a gallery and yourself for the curator." "And what is she?" he asked. "A door that opens in only one direction." "Toward what?" "Away," the prince said simply, and the word rattled his teeth. The scene collapsed. The masks upon their pikes turned obligingly to watch him. One grief tilted in the draft as if to say, "Choose." He reached without deciding and found a mask already in his hand, weightless and heavy, the shape of humility. It fit badly. He set it aside, ashamed of the impulse and ashamed of the shame. "Put it on," the prince suggested, idle as a cat. "Let us mock you together." He stared at the mask. "Why?" "Because awareness without art is only pain, because you cannot return to ignorance, and there is nothing behind you but an empty gallery, because I adore you when you bleed in tune." He put it on. It was not a costume. It was a confession brought to the surface. His spine learned new angles. His voice remembered the lower register it had been born without. The room grew, or he shrank. He did not dislike it. That frightened him. Across the stage, a second figure formed from condensed attention and powdered memory. The Inquisitor, or rather the idea of her made of straight lines and clean verbs. She did not blink. Ideas do not need to moisten their eyes. "State your vector," the idea said, voice exact as a rule. He answered with the line the prince had handed him like a prop, "To bring you lack undone with art." "Then you will fail," said the idea, and stepped once, which moved her through 5 positions. "Because I am not lack, I am vow." The mask tightened on his face until it felt fused. His wound, obedient to theater, began to sing low, steady, the pitch of a held note that finds a harmony and then refuses it. Ask her what she fears, the prince murmured. He did. What do you fear? Becoming you, the idea answered, a feeling that cannot end. He would have smiled if the mask permitted it. And I fear becoming you. A choice that cannot be taken back. She finished for him. And for a breath they were two hands of the same clock. The prince clapped once, delighted without moving. Look how pretty you are when you admit you are not large enough to hold your own hunger. Heat flushed him. The mockery was not in the words. It was in how carefully they were set, as if each were a jewel glued to a fracture. Why do you want this then? He asked, voice roughened by the mask's honesty. Why press me against an edge that dulls me? Because dull blades bruise, said the prince, lazy and exact, and bruises last. You are not an executioner's sword. You are a lover's knife. You make shapes that ache. He went very still. And because, the prince added, almost kindly, you are not wrong to envy her. The vow is not colder than the fever. It is only sharper. She holds a single note forever. You, the pause was affectionate, you invent new chords to avoid silence. He thought of the garden, of curated flavors decanted by men in aprons sewn from confessions. He thought of the convoy's last song cooling on metal. He thought, treacherously, of the servitor whispering a broken why. He thought of the inquisitor's mouth when she said grieved and refused to be tempted by pity offered like a bribe. I am tired, he said, and the stage accepted the sentence as blocking. Then change your instrument, the prince said. Stop trying to make her a mouth, make her an audience. He frowned behind the mask. An audience does not surrender. No, the prince said, delighted, it judges, and judgment is a flavor you have not licked yet without sugar. The chair shaped like a question became a lectern. The masks applauded the transformation by not moving. The idea of the inquisitor remained a line segment of refusal. He stood on the stage as if summoned to defend a thesis he had only just learned he believed. Argue, the prince purred. For what? For your right to sing in a city that sleeps on purpose. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he let the mask dictate his posture and began. He argued not with rhetoric, he had plenty, or with glamour, he had more, but with the one currency the inquisitor had accepted without calling it a trick, clarity. He spoke of mortals who mistook numbness for safety, of hymns used to cork bottles that needed to pour, of want that could either rot in cellars or be decanted into something that did not poison. He did not promise joy. He promised aliveness, and admitted its cost. The idea listened because ideas always do until they are given a reason not to. Art is a leash, she said at length. You make cages pretty and call it freedom. Sometimes pretty cages are the only way to keep the animal from chewing its own throat, he answered, and hated himself for the metaphor's accuracy. The prince hummed, content. The stage cooled. The lectern dwindled back into a question. The masks faced forward, faces having learned what they needed. The idea of the inquisitor dissolved into a line drawn so straight it left a cut in the air. You will go back, the prince said, a lullaby sharpened to a point. You will not try to pry her open. You will perform for her. You will make the city's restraint confess itself in public, elegantly, without blood if possible. You will fail, and you will succeed, and you will confuse the two so exquisitely that even I will taste something new. He removed the mask. Skin came away with it, a thin layer of vanity he did not want back. He bowed, not because he had to, but because the body sometimes knows the shape of gratitude while the mind is still catching up. Am I forgiven? He asked before he could decide not to. Forgiven? The prince's amusement softened into something like pride. My sweetest blade, I am entertained. That is better. The stage withdrew like tide. Columns remembered they were pipes. The mirror recollected rust. The candles shortened into lamps ashamed of their fragrance. He stood once more in the underhall, alone except for the sound of recirculated air and a wound that had decided to keep time. He touched his chest and found the rhythm less frantic, not healed, arranged. The mockery had done its work, pared him down, shown him the silliness of his old flourishes, left him sharper where it mattered. An audience, then, he murmured, judgment as flavor. He almost smiled, small, private, a rehearsal room smile no crowd would ever see. Then he began to plan a performance no one would willingly attend, and no one would be able to leave without discovering which part of them had been applauding all along. Above him, somewhere a prayer engine changed key. He matched it, humming a counterpoint that tasted like honest work. The city did not fall. It endured. That was worse. The daemon had expected ruin screams, devotion melting into ecstasy, the cathedral bursting open in colors unfit for human sight. Instead, the fortress city returned to its rituals, scarred but intact. The Inquisitor's sermons multiplied. The people sang louder to drown out the whispers that still slid under their skin. Every hymn was a barricade, every act of faith a wall built higher. And he once, architect of seduction, sculptor of want, became a shadow that drifted through the cracks, unable to tear them wider, unable to vanish. He tried subtlety first. He painted temptations across dreams, soldiers who found comfort in forbidden touch, priests who heard the emperor sigh instead of command, widows who dreamed of laughing again. But when they awoke, they didn't fall into desire, they prayed harder. They mortified the flesh he tried to awaken. They made idols of denial. Every time one resisted, he felt the recoil of their faith like a lash across his back. The wound in his chest throbbed brighter, refusing to close. For the first time in his existence, the daemon began to fade. It started with the edges of his form. His fingers no longer held shape, his outline frayed like smoke in wind. His reflection in glass became hesitant, unsure. Sometimes he would catch a glimpse of himself and see her eyes staring back at him, steady, unwavering, unbearably mortal. He hated it. He needed to feel again. So he descended. Beneath the city ran tunnels older than the Imperium, built by forgotten hands when the world still dreamed of prosperity. There, hidden from the hymns above, he sought the only audience that would still listen: the outcasts. The poor, the broken, the addicts who worshipped the void because it never judged them. He appeared before them not as an angel nor a horror, but as something familiar, a man beautiful in the way of ruin. Cloaked in bruised light, eyes heavy with exhaustion, voice a lullaby for those who no longer wanted to wake. He spoke softly, of pain that could be beautiful, of hunger that could be holy, of love that existed even in damnation. And they believed. They began to gather each night in the underhalls, drawn to his words like moths to a dying flame. He named them the choir of fleshless hymns. They offered not prayers but sensations, cuts, dances, tears, embraces. He accepted them all, not as offerings, but as evidence. For a time, he felt alive again. Their devotion fed him not the shallow ecstasy of lust, but the raw desperation of those who sought meaning in filth. It was imperfect, messy, painfully human. And it worked. Until it didn't. The first to die was a woman named Lyra. She had once been a scribe, her eyes burned blind from copying scriptures by candlelight. She asked him what it felt like to see the world without fear. He told her. He opened her mind for one moment, just one, and let her glimpse the warp's color. She screamed herself to death. Her blood steamed. Her face, frozen in awe, reflected something that looked like peace. The others called it a miracle. He called it a mistake. But the taste of her death, its honesty lingered, and he hated how good it felt. So he did it again. And again. Each time he swore it was to understand, to refine the melody. Each time he told himself it was art. And each time, as they fell, moaning, laughing, weeping into his arms, the hollow in his chest filled for just a moment. Then it emptied again, deeper than before. The choir dwindled, their numbers consumed by his curiosity. When there were none left, he sat among the corpses and waited for guilt to fade. It didn't. It coiled around his heart like a lover's arm. "You promised not to bruise," he whispered to the darkness. The darkness did not answer. He closed his eyes and saw Slaanesh's throne again, beautiful, patient, eternal. He saw his master smiling, watching, waiting. "Do you enjoy the lesson, my little symphony?" He wanted to scream, but only laughter came out. What lesson? That indulgence is never infinite. It decays, just like beauty, just like faith. He shook his head. "No, you made me endless." Endless hunger, yes, not endless joy. That would be wasteful. The laughter faded. He was alone again, but the words stayed. He looked at the bodies surrounding him, twisted, peaceful, empty. For the first time, he didn't see worship. He saw himself. He saw what he had become. Not an artist, not a messenger, not even a monster. Just a wound, pretending to be meaning. He stood, trembling. His body flickered between forms, the perfect beauty of his birth and the crumbling ruin of his awareness. He couldn't decide which was worse. He clawed at his skin, ripping it apart, trying to shed both. The air filled with shimmering motes of light as pieces of him disintegrated. Beneath the illusion of flesh, he found nothing, no muscle, no bone, only a hollow singing void. He fell to his knees. What am I now? From somewhere deep within the emptiness came a whisper, not the prince this time, but his own voice, fractured and layered. A question. He laughed through tears that weren't real. And questions are eternal. The wound in his chest flared again, brighter than ever before. Light spilled from it, flooding the chamber. The corpses of his choir ignited, not burning, but transforming, their flesh dissolving into ribbons of sound that coiled upward, weaving into a spiral of luminescent smoke. It rose higher, piercing the stone above. For a heartbeat, the city trembled. The faithful above looked skyward, mistaking it for an omen. The Inquisitor herself paused mid-prayer, her breath catching as a sound, half sorrow and half rapture, echoed through her mind. Then the light was gone. The daemon remained alone in the ruin he had made. He felt nothing now, not hunger, not satisfaction, not pain, just stillness. It terrified him. He whispered into the silence, "Prince, say something." No laughter came, no warmth, no presence. The silence was complete, and in that silence he heard the truth. The melody he had followed his whole existence was ending. The prince had moved on to another note, another instrument. He was no longer part of the song. And yet, as he knelt there, surrounded by the remnants of his choir, he realized something stranger. The silence was not empty. It was listening. He began to hum, softly at first, uncertain, then louder, his own tune, off-key, imperfect. It echoed in the void, returned to him, altered, deeper. For the first time, it wasn't Slaanesh's song he was singing, it was his. It hurt. It was beautiful. The wound glowed once more, steady this time, not as punishment, but as a heartbeat. He smiled through the pain, then let the decay continue, he whispered, "At least it's mine." And the darkness, for once, did not laugh. Silence returned like tide over a battlefield, slow, deliberate, kind to nothing. He sat where the choir had ended, spine against a column that had once been a load-bearing promise. In the grease dark of the underhalls, the air still remembered the shapes of the dead. Their absence had temperatures. Their laughter, distilled to ash, clung to the stone the way incense refuses to evacuate a chapel. He lifted a hand and found it steady again, not because the hunger had been sated, but because it had folded itself into something thinner and more disciplined. A wire pulled taut across a chasm, a single string waiting to be plucked. When the aftersound finally bled away, he discovered that the quiet was not flat. It had grain, like wood. He ran his thoughts along it and felt resistance in places, polish in others. He had never listened to quiet as if it were music. "Is this relief?" he asked aloud, tasting the word like a novice sips medicine. The echo did not answer. It only returned his voice unfinished, as if to suggest a revision. He stood, and even that small decision felt like a liturgy. The wound in his chest did not flare, it breathed. He moved between the columns, careful not to disturb the geometry of the room, as if courtesy might persuade the silence to stay. Up close, the walls of the underhalls were not blank but scored with 1,000 small inscriptions, names, oaths, arithmetic, prayers written in hands that did not expect to be read. The city's underlanguage. He traced one with a fingertip and felt the intention of the writer constrict like a throat afraid to sing. "I hear you," he murmured. It had become a habit, this speaking to things that did not answer. When he reached the stairs, the steps had more story than stone. He climbed through a darkness that did not hate him and came into a service corridor where the machines prayed to themselves, No alarms, no pursuit, no prince. The absence seated itself beside him like a companion who had learned how not to touch. The fortress city was waking above its morning sirens practiced, its ration queues already a choreography. He took the long way around the basilica to avoid the square and its rituals, and found instead a side yard where grass attempted stubbornly to be green. A maintenance cherub slept in a rusted bracket, wings cinched with scripture tape, mouth open on a small, embarrassed snore. The sight was ridiculous. It made something unclench. He sat on a stone bench and allowed the day to touch him without petition. The sky had the color of boiled bone. A single bird, not an omen, merely a bird, stitched its solitary line from parapet to parapet. He followed it with his eyes and discovered that his vision had edges again. The world had stopped smearing to accommodate him. He would have called that an insult once. Now he found it sheltering. The quiet grew bolder with practice. It stopped behaving like an absence and began to act like a space. Into that space came memory not as glamour or curated sensation, but as unadorned sequence. The boy in the square with stubble not yet convinced by his jaw, the woman with soot on her apron carrying the citrus-bright child. Lyra, blind from piety, whose last breath had sounded like relief. The Inquisitor's mouth when she said grieved, a word that cut more cleanly than no. The servitor whispering why. He did not turn these into wine. He did not plate them on meaning. He let them sit, unprocessed, and discovered that they did not rot. They cooled. They arranged themselves. He felt, faint and far, as whether on a different continent, the prince's attention drift across the horizon of his mind, and then away again, interested, amused, in love with all outcomes. No reprimand, no indulgence. He had been left on a shoreline with a knife and told to make a boat. Very well, he said to no one, and meant it. Something small and practical suggested itself. Water. The bench faced a busted spigot whose valve had fused with prayer wax. He pressed his thumb to the metal and warmed it with a thought until the wax wept. The handle turned, a trickle stuttered, and then steadied. He cupped his hands and drank. It tasted of iron and long pipes and the discipline of pressure. The first swallow jarred him so plain, so honest, so utterly without theatre. He took another. The quiet in his chest stood to applaud. He laughed, and the laugh sounded like a man's laugh. He did not correct it. A door scraped. Boots. The weight of caution distributed across stone. He did not turn until the shadow reached the grass at his feet. "You do not run," said the Inquisitor. "I am tired of running at and from the same thing," he answered, and did not rise. Courtesy now was not performance but economy. Some gestures are too expensive to buy meaning with. She came to stand beside the spigot, regarding the dribble as if it were a problematic doctrine. No escort, no gun drawn. A trick anyone could name bravado, and therefore not a trick. She knelt, turned the handle farther, and let the stream find its own larger throat. Water took the permission gratefully. "You killed them," she said. "Yes. You could have chosen not to." "I could have chosen to be who I was yesterday," he said, and shrugged. "I have already failed at that." "Repentance," she said, tasting the word without swallowing. "Accuracy," he replied. They shared the water without looking at each other. The cherub snored on. The bird stitched a second line and then lost interest. When she spoke again, her voice had the softness of a whetstone. "What do you want now?" The old answers, the formal catechism of his God, arrived dressed and ready. Surrender, spectacle, exquisite ruin. They felt too loud for the bench. He surprised himself. "To sit," he said. "To listen until the noise inside me decides which parts are worth keeping." "No part," she said, "will volunteer for deletion." "I know," he said, and smiled. "I will have to curate." A silence followed that respected its own boundaries. She folded her gloves twice before putting them back on. Discipline became a human variation, not an absolute. He found that he preferred it that way. "I will not absolve you," she said at last. "I will not ask you. I will still end you," she added, not as a threat but as a calendar entry. "Of course," he said. "Endings are how mortals give events their edges." "And you?" "I am learning to draw a line." She made the smallest sound, which might have been a laugh that had agreed to wear armor. Do not become sentimental. I am attempting the opposite, he said. Precision. She stood. The water ran. A rivulet found a crack in the flagstones and wrote its first letter there, a slow cursive no one would read. He watched her watch the letter. In another life they might have been colleagues, two craftsmen, arguing measurement. There will be a purge for the underhalls, she said. Your choir, it cannot be allowed to seed myth. They were not a myth, he said quietly. No, she agreed. They were choices. My city must learn how to name them that way. You will not lie about them, he said. It was not a question. No, she repeated, and the word arrived without escort. He nodded. Then I have heard everything I needed to. She turned to go and stopped. Do not mistake this quiet for mercy. It is a hallway. At the end of it is a door. On the other side of the door is fire. Of course, he said again, and meant that too. But fire also clarifies. She left with the same economy she had entered. He did not watch her go. He listened instead to the unremarkable music of a functioning pipe. When the yard was his again, he closed the valve, stood, and set his hand over the wound. The skin there had learned a new honesty. It did not pretend to be unbroken. It did not bleed either. It kept time. He looked up at the basilica's high stone, the scraped wall only a few turns of corridor away, and imagined the mural as it had become in memory, not a blasphemy, but a draught. A study of a face in which doubt had been allowed to breathe. He thought, not with lust, not even with appetite, but with craft. I will make something that does not need to be destroyed to be holy. The audacity of that sentence should have tasted like treason. It tasted like clean water. He walked back toward the stairs and paused by the bracket where the cherub snored. Its little chest hitched. Its wing tape had come loose. He retied it without magic, without comment, the way one straightens a frame in a hallway no one visits twice. On the descent, the city's soundscape arranged itself into chords he could name: ration whistles, fifth, tram chains, minor third, catechisms, pedal tone. He fitted a line between them that would not clash. He did not hum it, he just remembered. The underhalls received him with the courtesy of places that have recently hosted a tragedy and learned how to keep their voices down. He returned to the column where he had sat and found the floor neither sanctified nor cursed, simply useful. He swept it with his hand. Stone became clear of what did not need to stay. When he closed his eyes, the silence was still there, patient, available. He let it fill him to the brim, and then made the smallest sound a single note, unembellished, held just long enough to learn its color. The note did not bloom into ecstasy. It did not skewer him on revelation. It did the humbler, stranger thing. It stayed true. He lowered his voice to match it, and the wound agreed. For the first time since his birth scream in the warp, he felt the possibility of a life that did not require crescendo to be real. Above, bells rehearsed their noon. The prince did not whisper, the garden did not summon, the city did not fall. He exhaled and named the quiet properly. Thank you, he said. No one heard. That seemed correct. He raised his hands not to conduct, not to bless, only to measure the room, and began the work of building a stage that could hold sorrow without needing to break for applause. The silence stayed. So did he. The silence endured for 3 days. No summons from the warp, no whispers from the prince, no movement from the inquisitor. The daemon sat alone in the underhalls, where the air was heavy and damp, the walls sweating condensation like a body remembering its life. He thought the quiet might eventually devour him, that his hunger would awaken and howl again. But it did not. It stayed asleep. In its absence came something unfamiliar weight. Mortals called it time. He began to count it without meaning to. A drip from a cracked pipe above marked the seconds. The breath between each drop became rhythm. He listened to it the way he once listened to symphonies. It lacked crescendos, lacked seduction, lacked pain, yet it was consistent, unflinching. It reminded him of the Inquisitor's voice, measured, disciplined, steady as a scalpel. He whispered to the air, as though she might somehow hear him. You were right, the roof collapses, and I keep calling it sky. The echo did not return the words. Instead, it shaped something else, a wordless sound, soft, deliberate like the exhale of a thought not his own. He frowned, looking around the chamber. The darkness rippled faintly, its edges stirring like silk, and from that dark came himself. The reflection walked forward, pale light gleaming beneath its skin. Its face was perfect again, unbroken, unmarred by doubt or decay. The eyes shone like twin candles, one gold, one violet. Its voice, when it spoke, was silk drawn over glass. "You have gone quiet," said the reflection. "Even the prince wonders if you've gone dull." He watched it carefully, as though it might dissolve into memory. "You are what I was." "No," said the other, smiling faintly. "I am what you could still be. The version of you that never bled, never hesitated, never questioned." "Then you are fiction." "And yet," said the reflection, "you believe me." It circled him slowly, like a predator that had forgotten why it hunted. "You've grown so small," it said. "Look at yourself sitting among stones, drinking rusted water, pretending that humility is art. You've mistaken stillness for growth." He looked down at his trembling hands. "Maybe stillness is growth." "No," the reflection said sharply. "Stillness is death. You've seen what mortals become when they stop desiring. They petrify. They call it peace. You would join them?" He shook his head. "I'm not joining them. I'm learning." The reflection laughed. It was not cruel, it was familiar, almost tender, and that made it worse. "Learning what? That you can't escape what you are? That your God's silence is permission, not absence?" The daemon rose. His form flickered in the low light, half divine, half human. "I am not seeking escape." "Then what are you seeking?" He hesitated. "Meaning." The reflection smiled sadly. "Meaning is a mortal invention. We are made for appetite, not purpose." "Then why am I still alive?" he asked softly. "Because you amuse him," said the reflection. "Because you bleed beautifully." He stepped closer, close enough to see the perfection of his own features reflected back. "And what if I don't want to amuse him anymore?" The reflection tilted its head, eyes narrowing. "Then you become nothing." "Maybe that's the point." "Liar." The words struck like a knife. "You don't want oblivion. You want authorship. You want to name your suffering and pretend that makes it sacred." He smiled faintly. "If that's true, at least it's mine." The reflection's grin faltered. For the first time it looked uncertain. "You think claiming pain changes what it is?" "It changes who it belongs to." Silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. The reflection moved again, circling him like smoke. "You think you've escaped him, but look at yourself. Even your defiance is his design. Every act of rebellion is just another note in his symphony." "Then I will change the melody." The reflection chuckled softly. "You cannot change eternity." He met its eyes. "No, but I can refuse to sing along." That stopped it. For the first time, the reflection seemed smaller, not weaker, but less inevitable. Its voice trembled, just slightly. "You are fracturing," it said, "and when you break, you will crawl back to the garden and beg for indulgence." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'll teach myself a new hunger." "And what would that be?" He looked upward, toward the ceiling that separated him from the city, the mortals, the sunlight, the meaningless repetition of their days. "To want nothing, to love what remains after desire ends." The reflection recoiled. "That isn't hunger, that's blasphemy." "Then perhaps it's time a daemon committed one." The light behind the reflection's eyes flickered, dimming like candles snuffed by a sudden wind. Its form rippled, face twisting not in rage, but in pain. It reached for him, but its hand passed through his chest harmlessly, scattering into faint motes of light. "You think silence will save you," it hissed, its voice warping, overlapping itself. "But silence forgets, and when even memory abandons you, you will call for the prince, and he will not answer." "Good," he whispered. "Then I will finally be free." The reflection's scream shattered the air. It tore itself apart, fragments of light and shadow flying outward, embedding into the stone. For a moment, he saw his old face multiplied across every shard, hundreds of perfect masks, each one smiling as it died. When the light faded, the underhalls were quiet again. He looked down. One shard remained whole, lying before him like a mirror that had survived the explosion. In its surface, he saw not perfection, but a faint, trembling image of his current self, scarred, weary, imperfect. And yet, it was alive. He touched the glass gently. "I'll remember you," he said, "not as a master, not as a warning, but as proof that I was once hollow." The shard flickered, then dissolved, its light soaking into his skin like warmth after winter. He closed his eyes and felt it settle, its last echo beating in rhythm with the wound in his chest. The hunger didn't vanish. It never would. But it no longer commanded. It listened. He stood and began to walk toward the light, filtering faintly through the cracks above. Every step felt heavier, but real, solid, mortal. As he climbed, he whispered to himself, "Desire made me, silence broke me, but reflection taught me how to begin again." He reached the surface as the first sunlight touched the horizon. The city had begun its morning hymns, and the sound rolled through the air like waves breaking on a distant shore. He listened not as a predator, not as a god, but as a witness. And for the first time, the music of faith did not hurt. The posters went up at dawn, as clean as indictments. Picked seals stamped in red wax, parchment cut square, language without perfume, assembly, witness, account. The city obeyed, it always had. But obedience had learned a new gait, measured, not mindless. The Inquisitor had given them that. Or perhaps he had, by failing loudly enough for nuance to be heard. He waited in the square where his first course had been served, stone scrubbed, blood ghosting in the pores like a watermark no sand could erase. Soldiers stood at perimeter angles that taught geometry to stay honest. Priests clustered at the steps, white-knuckled around censers. Above them all, the scraped wall of the basilica held its blankness like a discipline. He wore no glamour. The body he chose was the one the silence had left him, edges that admitted fatigue, a mouth that could close without posing, a chest that rose and fell in a rhythm that did not ask for applause. The wound over his heart was not covered. A seam of faint light showed through like the thread of a careful tailor. The Inquisitor arrived without announcement. No cape to love the wind, no theatrics a clever man could use against her. She simply was, and the square learned to breathe at her tempo. She offered him nothing with her face, not contempt, not pity, not the feral thrill of a hunter at the end of a long track. Only regard, the kind that makes a thing real enough to end. "Perform," she said, a single word that carried the weight of section, evidence, verdict. He inclined his head. A bow could mean respect or mockery. This one meant neither. It acknowledged audience. He did not conjure music. He did not gild the air. He spoke. "Your city knows my pattern," he began, voice low enough that silence had to come closer to carry it. "I turn want into theater and call the ovation truth. I do not repent. Repentance is a poor instrument. I will use accuracy instead." A murmur flickered and died. The sergeant he had spared stood within hearing, unmoved, not hostile, not relieved, merely present. Good. Presence was the only honesty mortals could afford across an entire life. "I was asked to find restraint and undo it with art," he continued. "Instead, I found a mirror, and it taught me a better grammar. So let us use it. Not liturgy, naming." He lifted a hand, palm outward, not to bless, but to indicate. The names came without flourish. "Lyra," he said, blind from copying the same line until the letters burned her eyes. She wanted mercy in a key she had never heard. I gave her the chord and called the collapse transcendence. The truth. I wanted to confirm a theory. She died for an adjective. No gasp. The square did not grant him that. It gave him listening. "The boy in the square," he went on. He had a scarf under a mattress, and no word for why it kept him alive at shift's end. I placed a hand on his brow to see how much sweetness a mortal throat could swallow before it cut itself. He showed me. I called it exquisite. It was lazy. A priest flinched. The scent of incense failed to find nerve endings. "The choir," he said softly. "They gathered because I sounded like hope. I was not hope. I was hunger with good diction." He lowered the hand. "This is not confession. I know the difference. This is inventory. The warehouse is full. Label it correctly." The Inquisitor let the silence do its job. Then, "And what is the label for you?" He met her eyes. "Instrument. Out of tune. Repairable only by changing what it is meant to play." "And what is that now?" "An ending." Something moved in the air, then very small, easily missed if one's life had not been spent calibrating to subtleties. Not wind. Attention. The square did not feel it. He did. It slid into him like the memory of perfume on a garment you cannot afford to keep. "How novel," purred the voice that had written his bones. "My little Arya wants a coda." He did not kneel. He did not dare look away either. The prince's regard pressed each cell to declare allegiance. He answered by standing with both feet on stone. "Watch," he said inwardly. "I always do," the prince said, amused. "But you know the rule. Songs end in one of two ways. Crescendo or cut. Choose." He smiled, small and unlovely. "Neither. I choose closure." A warmth that might have been laughter, might have been pride, opened across his nerves like a hand. "Then take the last thing I have that you do not." A pause in which the universe rehearsed becoming smaller. "Take finitude." The square brightened by a shade only he could see. Weight returned to the air, true weight, not theater. The wound in his chest ceased to glow and began to bleed. Red, mundane, humiliating. The immortality that made sin a hobby pulled back its tongue from his spine. For the first time since his birth, his life had edges that cut in both directions. He laughed, and it sounded like a man's fear wearing bravery. "Thank you," he whispered, not to the crowd, not to the Inquisitor, but to the voice that had given him a door he could close. "What did you receive?" she asked, hearing the change without knowing its name. "Permission," he said. "For what?" "To stop." He turned to the crowd. "This is the part where I beg or preen or erupt into color," he told them plainly. "I will not. I will ask one thing only. Do not mythologize what I have done. Do not alchemize choices into fate. If you need a word for it, use appetite and let it sit in plain glass until it clarifies." He faced the Inquisitor again. "Make your city remember without incense." She studied him, the way a craftsman studies a joint before the last strike. "Do you want absolution?" "I want accuracy," he answered, "and an ending that does not lie about what it ends." The sergeant stepped forward half a pace. He did not speak. He did not need to. The square's pulse steadied around the gap where words might have been. The Inquisitor lowered the safety on her bolt pistol. Duty did not darken her face. It cleaned it. "Any last ornament?" she asked, and made the question neither taunt nor kindness, only procedure. He glanced at the scraped wall, the blank that used to be blasphemy. "Only this. I liked your word for me." "What word?" "Interference," he said, and almost smiled. "May your city keep a small amount. It prevents rot." She nodded once, the kind of nod one gives a measurement that checks out. Then she aimed, not at his head where theater lives, but at the wound that had learned to keep time. Precision, to the end. He did not flinch. He did not arrange the light. He brought his hand to his chest as a man does when the pain is exactly where he knew it would be. The bolt struck. The world did not flower. It shrunk. Sound peeled away from edges. Color refused to perform. He felt, in quick, exact succession, pressure, rupture, heat, the ridiculous, tender shock of air on an interior it was never meant to touch. He had eaten 1,000 deaths and never tasted this one. It was undecorated. It was perfect. He fell to one knee and found the stone's temperature comprehensible. Cold, an honest adjective. He had always trafficked in metaphors because the literal world bored him. Now the literal held him like a truth he had failed to audition for. He looked up once more, not at the prince, who did not lean close, not at the sky, which did not open, but at the Inquisitor. She met his gaze and did not look away. In the glareless interval between heartbeats he understood her vector at last, not denial, not hunger, but a craftsperson's fidelity to materials. "Thank you," he said, and meant for the lesson, for the refusal, for the correct blow. "Account," she replied, "the smallest benediction the law allows." The second shot was not necessary. She did not fire it. The square stayed very still. No choir rose, no garden yawned. The prince's laughter did not braid the air. The gift had done its work. He died like a mortal dies, in a narrowing that found the center true. Darkness arrived without theater and discovered there was room. In that room, something small and exact happened, a final uncoiling. Desire set down its tools, hunger folded its apron. The wound over his heart, relieved of work, closed not to heal, but to finish. There was no aftertaste. There was no echo. There was only the shape he left behind in the listening. The city exhaled. A priest raised a censer and then lowered it again, remembering the request. The sergeant touched 2 fingers to his brow and did not name the gesture. The inquisitor holstered the pistol, turned to the crowd, and spoke the only sentence that would not lie. Witness has been made. Later, when the parchments were written and the purge orders narrowed to fit what had actually happened, the scraped wall remained blank by decree. Not in honor. In precision. Someone stenciled 3 letters at its base in chalk a cleaner mist. N-O-W. Rain found them before censure did and carried them into the stone. In the warp, a throne reclined, entertained. A prince tasted an unfamiliar flavor judgment without sugar, and grinned like a god shown a new mirror. And beneath a basilica in a fortress city that had learned to hold both hymns and accuracy in the same square, silence kept the note he had chosen. It did not crescendo. It did not cut. It stayed. The city forgot his name within a year. That was the first mercy. His trial was written down in parchment, sealed, filed, and exorcised from record. The Inquisitor's report concluded in 12 sentences, precise, bloodless, entirely unmusical. The choir of fleshless hymns was deemed a heretical delusion, their leader a manifestation of the warp's indulgence, terminated under sanctioned decree. There were no hymns of mourning, no statues, no stories. And yet he remained. Not in flesh, nor in rumor, but in resonance. It began subtly. The masons repairing the basilica's walls noticed that the new stone hummed faintly when struck. Not a defect, not an echo, just a single tone, low and constant, as if the city itself had swallowed a note and refused to release it. The workers didn't speak of it aloud, but when the wind blew through the cloisters, they found themselves humming the same frequency without knowing why. In time, the sound spread. Through the pipes of the hab blocks, through the drain tunnels and the bell towers, through the throats of sleeping children. Always faint, always there. A music too quiet to hear, but too persistent to ignore. The kind of song that doesn't ask to be noticed, it simply is. The Inquisitor heard it too. She stood one evening at the balcony of her quarters overlooking the square. The basilica glowed under the low sun, its golden eaves turned to dull brass. The wind carried that faint hum, steady and patient, as if the world itself were breathing through the stone. She closed her eyes. She did not call for exorcists. She did not order silence. Perhaps, she thought, not all hauntings are curses. Far below, in the underhalls, something stirred within the quiet. It was not a being, not consciousness in the way the galaxy measures it. More like an impression, a shape left in the air where devotion and hunger had once wrestled, a memory fossilized in atmosphere. It did not move. It remembered itself slowly, like a note learning its pitch. No body, no voice, no command from above. And yet awareness flickered. The quiet welcomed it, folding around the shape with the gentleness of old fabric. He, though the word no longer fit, did not recall the moment of dying, only the release. The way color had drained, until meaning itself went still. Then, after what could have been an age or a heartbeat, he felt the pull again, not from the prince, but from the absence left behind. Where once hunger burned, there was now curiosity. Where once desire consumed, there was now the faint pulse of listening. He listened. The world above was heavy with rhythm, the creak of machines, the drone of devotion, the heartbeat of the living. He had heard it all before, but this time it came without demand. It was ordinary, beautiful because it did not try to be. He remembered her face, the Inquisitor. The way she had said, "Account." The way she had not looked away. He remembered the word she had given him, interference. He smiled into the darkness that was no longer a prison. Yes, he whispered, though no lips moved. Interference. A good word for a song that refuses to end. He felt the hum again, the one carried by the city, by stone and wind, his final note, transformed. It had taken root, not as worship, not as heresy, but as balance. A counterpoint between faith and doubt, order and hunger. A harmony small enough to hide inside silence. Perhaps that was the final gift, he thought. Not pleasure, not pain. Continuance. He did not feel the prince's presence anymore. But sometimes, when the hum deepened in pitch, he sensed amusement rippling faintly through the warp. Not anger, not disappointment. Amusement. As if Slaanesh had tasted his defiance, rolled it across an infinite tongue, and decided to keep the flavor. "You did not fail," the remembered voice murmured once, not aloud but in the vibration of memory. "You became texture." He had no answer for that. There was nothing left to argue with. So he stayed within the hum, within the quiet, within the seams of reality, where neither gods nor mortals bothered to look. He watched the years turn. The city endured. The people built new idols, buried new saints. The basilica's wall remained blank, rain traced over it like a gentle hand, and the stones sang faintly where the chalk letters had once been. NOW. Centuries later, when the fortress world fell to siege, when the heretic fleets ringed its sky and turned its towers to burning glass, something extraordinary happened. As the first shells hit the city, the defenders heard it, the hum rising, stronger than it had ever been. The basilica shook, not from impact, but from resonance. The air trembled with a sound like breathing, like 1,000 voices exhaling the same word, enough. And then, for a single instant, everything stopped. The guns fell silent. The warp itself seemed to hold its breath. The soldiers, the heretics, the dying, all of them heard the same tone. It carried no message, no command, no promise of salvation. Only presence. When the bombardment resumed, no one spoke of it again. But among the rubble, survivors swore the fallen city did not scream, it sang. In the warp, far beyond comprehension, Slaanesh reclined upon the throne of endless sensation, surrounded by choirs that never ceased. But somewhere beneath the symphony, beneath the roar of desire and the agony of beauty, a different note lingered steady, quiet, unyielding. The prince listened. It did not belong to him. It did not seek his approval. It simply existed, a thread of mortality woven into the fabric of eternity. He smiled, the kind of smile that breaks and blesses at once. "My beautiful mistake," he whispered. "How dull eternity would be without you." The laughter that followed rippled across the warp, gentle for once, almost kind. Back in the ruins of the city, moss grew where marble had cracked. Pilgrims no longer came. The basilica was half buried, the square swallowed by time. But if one stood still enough, if one dared to listen past the wind and dust, one could still hear it, the faint hum, the final echo of a demon who had learned to end. It had no rhythm now, no crescendo, just a single note, eternal in its modesty. Neither joy nor sorrow, neither worship nor rebellion, only being. A reminder that even in the cruel, endless dark of the 41st millennium, where gods feast on souls and mortals pray to survive another sunrise, there existed, for a moment, a sound that belonged to neither. The echo of a creature who had once called himself hunger, who had learned silence, who had been given the rarest gift of all, finitude. And somewhere, in the spaces between prayers and screams, that note endures still, unheard by most, unforgotten by everything. It is not victory. It is not redemption. It is simply the truth.